The dust tasted like failure. Eliza Carter knew that taste well by now, gritty, bitter, coating her tongue like ash from dreams that wouldn't stop burning. She stood at the edge of Cutter's Pass, a town that looked like it had been carved out of the earth by men too stubborn to know when to quit, and felt the last of her hope drain into the cracked dirt beneath her boots. 3 weeks ago, she'd had a plan. A month before that, she'd had prospects. Now she had 14 cents, a carpet bag with a broken handle, and the growing certainty that the world didn't give a damn whether Eliza Carter lived or died. The stagecoach that had dumped her here was already a dust cloud on the horizon, heading back east toward civilization and away from this blistered frontier hellscape. She'd spent her last real money on that ticket, betting everything on a position that had been promised, guaranteed, the letter had said, at the Widow Fairchild's boarding house. Except there was no position. There was no Widow Fairchild anymore either. The woman had died 2 months back, and her nephew had sold the property to a saloon owner who looked at Eliza like she was something that had crawled out from under the floorboards when she'd shown up with her letter of introduction. "Don't know nothing about no arrangement," he'd said, tobacco juice staining his teeth brown. "And I ain't in the charity business. You want work, there's work upstairs. Otherwise, move along." She'd moved along. Fast. But that had been 6 hours ago, and 6 hours of knocking on doors had taught her what she'd already suspected. A woman alone, with no references, no family, and no money, was worth less than the dirt in this town. The general store didn't need help. The hotel had laughed in her face. Even the laundry, had turned her away, saying they had all the girls they needed. The sun was getting low now, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Eliza stood in the shadow of the livery stable, watching the town start its slow transition into night. Lanterns flickered to life in windows. Men headed toward the saloons. Somewhere, a baby cried, and a woman's voice sang it quiet. Eliza's stomach cramped with hunger. She'd eaten half a biscuit that morning and nothing since. The 14 cents in her pocket wasn't enough for a meal, wasn't enough for a bed, wasn't enough for anything that mattered. She could feel the panic starting to rise, cold and sharp in her chest. She'd been careful not to let it take hold all day, keeping it locked down, staying focused on the next door, the next possibility. But now, with the sun sinking and the temperature starting to drop, the arithmetic was simple and brutal. No money meant no shelter. No shelter meant the street. The street meant... She cut the thought off. Wouldn't let herself finish it. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, brushed the dust from her skirt as best she could, and started walking again. There had to be something, someone, some way through this that didn't end with her selling the only thing she had left to sell. The main street was emptying out as she walked, boots clicking on the wooden sidewalk. Most of the shops were closed or closing. A few men loitered outside the Lucky Dollar saloon, eyeing her with the kind of interest that made her skin crawl. She kept her gaze forward, her pace steady. Predators could smell fear, and she'd be damned if she'd give them the satisfaction. She was so focused on projecting confidence she didn't have that she almost missed the notice. It was tacked to a post outside the land office, the paper already curling at the edges from the heat. Her eyes caught on it more from habit than hope. She'd been scanning every surface all day for anything that might read, "Help Wanted." This didn't say that, but what it did say made her stop cold. Wife needed. Man of property seeks woman of good character for immediate marriage. Must be practical, healthy, and willing to work. No romantic notions. This is a business arrangement. Inquire at Boone Ridge Ranch before sunset today. Eliza read it 3 times, her heartbeat picking up speed with each pass. A business arrangement. No romantic notions. She'd heard of such things, of course. Mail-order brides, frontier marriages of convenience, desperate men in desperate places making practical choices. It was common enough out here where women were scarce and the work was brutal, but she'd never imagined she'd be desperate enough to consider it herself. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting long shadows across the street. Before sunset today. That meant she had maybe an hour, maybe less. Eliza looked down at her dusty skirt, her scuffed boots, the carpet bag that held everything she owned. She thought about the street, about the saloon owner's offer, about the long, cold night ahead with nowhere to go. Then she thought about the word property. A man of property wouldn't post a notice like this unless he actually had something to offer. Land, at least. Shelter. Maybe even safety of a sort. It was a cage. But maybe a cage was better than the alternative. Before she could talk herself out of it, Eliza turned on her heel and headed for the livery. The stable hand was a kid, maybe 16, with hay in his hair and the wary look of someone who'd learned not to trust strangers. "Boone Ridge Ranch," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. "How do I get there?" The kid looked her up and down, taking in the dust and the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. "You answering that notice?" "That's my business." He shrugged. 3 miles north. Follow the main road past the creek, then take the fork toward the hills. Can't miss it. Big place. Only house for miles." "Can I rent a horse?" "You got money?" "Not enough." The kid scratched his head, looking uncomfortable. "Then I guess you're walking. Best hurry, though. Sun's almost down, and Mr. Boone don't strike me as the type to wait around." Eliza's jaw tightened. 3 miles. In boots that were already rubbing blisters, with the sun setting and her stomach empty and every muscle in her body screaming for rest. But what choice did she have? "Thank you," she said, and started walking. She made it a mile before she had to stop. Her feet were bleeding. She could feel the wetness inside her boots, warm and slick. The carpetbag felt like it weighed 100 pounds, the broken handle cutting into her palm. The temperature was dropping fast now that the sun was down, and she didn't have a coat. Eliza set the bag down and leaned against a fence post, breathing hard. In the distance, she could see the dark shape of hills rising against the darkening sky. Somewhere up there was Boone Ridge. Somewhere up there was a man who needed a wife and didn't care about romance. Somewhere up there was her last chance. She picked up the bag and kept walking. By the time she saw the house, it was almost full dark. It rose up out of the landscape like something that had grown there, weathered wood and stone, solid and sprawling, with light glowing warm in the windows. Outbuildings clustered around it like chicks around a hen, barn, bunkhouse, equipment sheds. In the paddock, she could make out the shapes of horses, dark against the last light. It was bigger than she'd expected, more substantial, the kind of place that took money and work and time to build, the kind of place a man wouldn't risk losing. Eliza stopped at the gate, suddenly aware of how she must look. Dust-covered, exhausted, bleeding into her boots. Not exactly the picture of a woman of good character, but she was here, and she was out of options. She pushed open the gate and walked up the path to the house. The man who opened the door was not what she expected. She'd been picturing someone old, maybe, weathered and grizzled, too set in his ways to find a wife the normal way. Or perhaps someone scarred, marked by violence or hardship in a way that made women turn away. Caleb Boone was neither. He was maybe 35, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and darker eyes that assessed her with the same cool calculation she'd seen in livestock traders. He wore work clothes, denim and flannel, dusty from the day, but they fit him like they'd been made for him. His face was hard, the kind of hard that came from making difficult choices and living with the consequences. But he wasn't ugly, wasn't old, wasn't anything she'd prepared herself for. "You're here about the notice," he said. Not a question. Eliza lifted her chin. "I am." He looked her over, taking his time. She felt the assessment like a physical thing, measuring and weighing, looking for flaws, for weaknesses, for reasons to say no. "You're late," he said finally. Notice said before sunset. "I walked from town. It took longer than I expected. 3 miles is 3 miles. Should have planned better." Heat flashed through her, anger cutting through the exhaustion. "I didn't have the luxury of planning. I arrived in Cutter's Pass this morning expecting a job that didn't exist. I've spent the entire day being turned away from every establishment in town. I saw your notice an hour ago and walked here as fast as I could, so unless you've already found someone else, I'd appreciate the courtesy of at least hearing me out before you criticize my time management." Silence. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or possibly amusement. "You've got a mouth on you," he said. "I've got a spine, too. Is that a problem?" "Depends on whether you know when to bend it." "I know when I'm beaten," Eliza said quietly. "If I didn't, I wouldn't be here." He studied her for another long moment, then stepped back from the door. "Come in. Might as well talk where it's warm." The inside of the house was clean but sparse. furnished with the kind of heavy, practical furniture that could take abuse and keep standing. The main room had a fireplace with a good fire going, a table with 4 chairs, and a few other pieces that looked handmade. No decorations, no softness, just the bare necessities. A working man's house. Caleb gestured to one of the chairs. Sit. Eliza sat, trying not to let the relief show when the weight came off her feet. She set her carpet bag on the floor and folded her hands in her lap, waiting. He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against the fireplace mantel, arms crossed, and looked at her like she was a horse he was considering buying. What's your name? Eliza Carter. Where are you from? Pennsylvania, originally. Long way from home. I don't have a home anymore. Why not? She hesitated, then decided on the truth. Lies would come back to bite her, and she was too tired to keep track of them anyway. My father died 2 years ago, left debts. The house was sold to pay them. I worked for a family in Philadelphia for a while, but the wife decided I was getting too friendly with the husband. She met his gaze steadily. I wasn't, but her opinion mattered more than mine, so I left. And came here. I had a position lined up, or I thought I did. The woman who hired me died before I arrived. So you're broke? Yes. No family? No husband? No. Why not? The question caught her off guard. Why not what? Why no husband? You're not ugly. You can't be more than 25, 26. Most women are married by now. Eliza felt her spine stiffen. I'm 24, and I never found a man worth marrying. High standards. Reasonable ones. Which you're now willing to abandon to marry a complete stranger. The words stung because they were true. But Eliza didn't flinch. I'm willing to accept a practical arrangement with a man of property who's honest about what he wants. That's not abandoning standards. That's adapting to circumstances. Caleb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Practical. I like that. He pushed off the mantle and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. For a long moment he didn't say anything. Eliza waited, her heart hammering, trying not to let her desperation show. I'll be straight with you, he said finally, not turning around. I need a wife because the bank says I need one. Says a married man looks more stable, more likely to keep his property. I'm in debt up to my neck trying to hold this place together, and the vultures are circling. Having a wife makes me look like less of a risk. He turned to face her. This isn't about romance. Isn't about love. I need someone who can keep house, help with the work when needed, and not make my life more complicated than it already is. In exchange, you get a roof, food, and protection. That's the deal. Nothing more. What about... Eliza hesitated, then forced herself to say it. The marriage bed? His expression didn't change. That's your choice. I won't force anything. But if you're asking whether I expect heirs eventually, the answer is yes. This place needs someone to pass it to. Eventually. Eventually, when you're ready, if you're ever ready. He crossed his arms again. Like I said, this is practical. I'm not interested in making you miserable. Just need you to hold up your end. Eliza absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. It was cold, certainly. Transactional. But it was also honest, which was more than most men offered. What's the catch? She asked. The catch? Nobody posts a notice like that unless they're desperate. You've got property, you're not old or hideous, and you seem capable of basic conversation. So why can't you find a wife the normal way? For the first time, something that might have been respect crossed his face. You're smart. Good. You'll need to be. He moved back to the fireplace, staring into the flames. The catch is that this ranch is under siege. There's a man named Silas Rourke who wants my land, and he's willing to do just about anything to get it. He's been buying up properties all around here, consolidating power. I'm one of the last holdouts, and he's making my life hell for it. What's he doing? Drives my cattle prices down, makes it hard to get supplies, spreads rumors in town. Legal harassment mostly, but it's effective. And lately, he paused. Lately, things have been escalating, fences cut, equipment damaged, nothing I can prove, but I know it's him. So you need a wife to look stable while you fight a war. That's about the size of it. Eliza looked around the room again, seeing it differently now. Not just sparse, but defended. The heavy furniture that could be moved to block doors, the rifle mounted over the fireplace, the way the windows were positioned to give sight lines. "This is dangerous," she said slowly. "Could be. You should have put that in the notice." "Would you have come if I had?" She thought about the street, the cold night, the alternative futures that waited for a woman with no money and no options. "Probably." "Then why does it matter?" "Because I like to know what I'm getting into." "Fair enough." He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "So now you know. This is what I'm offering, a hard life on a threatened ranch with a man you don't know and enemies who might decide you're a target. In exchange, you get food, shelter, and my name. That's the deal. Take it or leave it." The fire crackled in the silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Eliza could feel the weight of the moment, the way her whole life was balancing on what she said next. She thought about her father, dead in debtor's prison, about the house sold off piece by piece, about the woman in Philadelphia who'd looked at her like she was dirt, about 14 cents and bloody feet and the endless, exhausting fear that had been her constant companion for months. And she thought about this, a hard man offering a hard bargain, but an honest one, a place to stand, even if the ground was shaking. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly in a position to negotiate." "Neither are you, or you wouldn't have posted that notice." A beat. Then, "What conditions?" "I want to see the books. If I'm going to be part of this, I need to know exactly how bad the financial situation is." "Why?" "Because I'm good with numbers, and if this place goes under, I go down with it. I want to know what we're dealing with." "We," he repeated. "If I say yes, it becomes we. That's how marriage works, even the practical kind." He studied her for a long moment. "What else?" "I want your word that you won't hit me. I don't care how angry you get or how much I provoke you. I've seen what men do to women they think they own, and I won't live that way." "I'm not a wife beater." "Then it should be easy to promise." "Fine. You have my word." His jaw tightened. "Anything else?" "If I do this, if I marry you, I need to know you'll protect me. Not just from whatever Rourke might do, but from everything. I'm putting my life in your hands. I need to know you'll actually hold it." Something shifted in his expression. The cold assessment warmed, just fractionally. "I protect what's mine. You'd be mine. That's not a promise. It's a fact." "Then I accept." The words came out steady, sure, like she'd been planning to say them all along. Maybe she had been. Maybe from the moment she'd seen that notice, some part of her had known this was where she'd end up. Caleb blinked, clearly not expecting it to be that simple. "Just like that?" "Just like that. You need a wife. I need shelter. We both need to survive whatever's coming. It's not romantic, but it's rational." She stood, ignoring the screaming protest from her feet. "When do we do this?" "Now, tonight. The preacher lives about a mile from here. If we go now, we can be married within the hour." "That fast?" "You said yourself, we're both desperate. Why wait?" Eliza looked at him, this stranger she was about to bind her life to, and felt a strange calm settle over her. This was insane, reckless, the kind of choice that could destroy her. But staying in Cutter's Pass would destroy her too, just slower. At least this way, she'd go down fighting. "All right," she said. "Let's go get married." "What?" The preacher's house was a small adobe structure set back from the road, with a garden out front and chickens scratching in the yard. Reverend Michaels was an older man with kind eyes and the patient manner of someone who'd seen just about everything the frontier could throw at him. He didn't seem surprised when Caleb showed up after dark with a strange woman and asked to be married immediately. "You sure about this, Caleb?" he asked, looking between them. "Sure as I need to be." "And you, miss?" Eliza met his gaze. "I'm sure." The Reverend sighed. "All right, then. Come inside. We'll need witnesses." His wife and son served that purpose, standing awkwardly in the small parlor while the Reverend pulled out his Bible and a marriage certificate. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes, a few words about duty and faithfulness, the exchange of simple vows, Caleb's calloused hand rough against hers, as he slid a plain gold band onto her finger. She didn't ask where he'd gotten it, didn't want to know if it had belonged to someone else before her. And then it was done. The Reverend pronounced them married, the witnesses signed, and Eliza Carter became Eliza Boone. Just like that. A whole life changed in the time it took to say, "I do, sir." They rode back to the ranch in silence, Eliza sitting behind Caleb on his horse because she was too exhausted to walk. She could feel the solid warmth of his back, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, and the enormity of what she'd just done was starting to sink in. She was married to a stranger, on a ranch under siege by a powerful enemy she'd never met, and she had no idea if she'd just saved herself or made the worst mistake of her life. When they reached the house, Caleb helped her down, his hands strong and impersonal on her waist. "You can have the bedroom," he said. "I'll take the couch." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You look like you're about to fall over. Go. Sleep. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Eliza was too tired to argue. She retrieved her carpet bag and let him show her to a small clean room with a narrow bed and a single window. It wasn't much, but it was warm and it was safe, and it was hers. She closed the door, sat down on the bed, and for the first time all day, let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. Then she pulled off her boots, saw the blood soaked into her stockings, and started to laugh. It came out wild and slightly hysterical, but she couldn't stop. Couldn't stop laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all, that she'd walked 3 miles on bleeding feet to marry a stranger and save herself from homelessness, that she'd actually done it. The laughter turned into something that might have been crying, but she was too tired to tell the difference. She stripped off her dusty clothes, washed her feet in the basin by the window, and crawled into bed. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the house creaked and settled, and Eliza Boone, because that was her name now, for better or worse, closed her eyes and fell into the first real sleep she'd had in weeks. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The notice, the walk, the wedding, and she sat up fast, her heart pounding. Morning light streamed through the window. She'd slept in her underclothes, and her dress from yesterday was a dusty heap on the floor. Her feet ached, but felt better than they had last night. The voices outside the door were male, Caleb, and at least one other person. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was tense. Eliza got up, wincing as her feet hit the floor, and quickly pulled on the cleanest dress she had. It wasn't much. Plain brown cotton, worn at the seams, but it would have to do. She twisted her hair into a knot, splashed water on her face, and opened the door. Caleb stood in the main room with another man, younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a nervous energy that made him seem like he was always about to bolt. They both turned when she appeared. "Morning," Caleb said, his voice neutral. "This is Finn. He works here. Finn, this is my wife, Eliza." The word wife sounded strange in his mouth. Strange, but deliberate, like he was already using it to establish facts. Finn's eyes went wide. "Wife? Since when?" "Since last night. We got married." "You what?" Finn looked between them like they'd both lost their minds. "You can't just... she's..." "Careful," Caleb said quietly. Finn shut his mouth, but he was still staring at Eliza like she was a ghost. "Nice to meet you," Eliza said, keeping her voice polite. "Yeah, you too." Finn scratched his head, clearly struggling to process this. "So you're really married, like legal married?" "Legal as they come," Caleb confirmed. He turned to Eliza. "There's coffee on the stove and bread if you're hungry. We've got work to do, but I wanted to introduce you to Finn before we headed out." "Work?" "Fences need checking. Cattle need moving. Ranch doesn't run itself." "Right. Of course." Eliza hesitated. "Is there anything I should be doing?" Caleb's expression softened just slightly. "Today? Rest. Get your bearings. Tomorrow we'll figure out a routine. But you walked 3 miles last night and married a stranger. Take a day." It was more consideration than she'd expected. "Thank you." He nodded once, then headed for the door. Finn followed, still looking shell-shocked. Just before they left, Caleb paused and turned back. "Eliza." "Yes?" "Welcome to Boone Ridge, Then he was gone, and Eliza was alone in her new home. She spent the morning exploring. The house was bigger than it had seemed last night. 3 bedrooms, a main room that served as kitchen and living space, a small washroom out back. Everything was clean but worn, built to last rather than impress. There were signs of a woman's touch here and there, curtains that were faded but carefully mended, a quilt on the couch that had been made with skill, but they were old. Whoever had lived here before was long gone. Eliza didn't let herself wonder too much about that. Outside, the ranch sprawled across the valley like something out of a painting. Rolling hills, green despite the heat, dotted with cattle. The outbuildings were well maintained, the fences solid. In the distance, she could see Caleb and Finn working, small figures against the vastness of the land. It was beautiful, harsh, but beautiful. And it was hers now. Or would be, if they could hold it. She found the ranch office in a corner of the house. A small room with a desk, filing cabinets, and stacks of ledgers. Caleb had said she could see the books, and he'd meant it. They were right there, unlocked and waiting. Eliza sat down and started reading. My seat down. 2 hours later, she understood why Caleb needed the bank to see him as stable. The numbers were brutal. Revenue was down 30% over the last year. Expenses were up. Debt payments were eating into operating capital. And everywhere she looked, there were signs of deliberate sabotage. Cattle prices mysteriously dropping just before Caleb sold, supply costs spiking, contracts falling through. Silas Rourke's fingerprints were all over it. But there was something else too, something that made her pause. Caleb was smart. The way he'd structured his debts, the way he diversified income streams, the timing of his investments, it all showed a sharp mind and a careful hand. He was fighting hard, playing every angle. It just wasn't enough against an enemy with deeper pockets and no scruples. Eliza sat back, tapping her fingers on the desk. There had to be a way. Some strategy, some angle that Rourke hadn't anticipated. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started making notes.
This.
When Caleb came back that evening, dusty and exhausted, he found her still in the office, surrounded by ledgers and calculations. You've been busy, he said from the doorway. Eliza looked up, blinking. She'd been so absorbed she hadn't heard him come in. I hope you don't mind. You said I could look at the books. I did. He came closer, looking at the papers spread across the desk. What are you doing? Running scenarios, trying to find a way out. And I have some ideas, but I need to ask you something first. What? She met his gaze steadily. How committed are you to holding this land? It's everything. Even if it means taking losses in the short term? His jaw tightened. What are you suggesting? Survival, Eliza said simply. Not victory, not pride, just survival. If we're going to beat Rourke, we need to outlast him. That means cutting costs, liquidating assets, maybe even selling some land to consolidate what we can actually defend.
Sell land? Caleb's voice was dangerous. This land has been in my family for how long? Eliza interrupted. Because if Rourke takes it all, it won't matter. He's bleeding you dry, and you're letting him because you won't make the hard choices. Silence. She could see the anger in his face, the instinct to reject what she was saying, but she could also see him thinking, calculating. Show me, he said finally. So she did. Walked him through the numbers, the projections, the brutal arithmetic of what it would take to survive. Showed him how selling the outer parcels, the ones that were hardest to defend and least productive, could free up capital to pay down debt and invest in what remained. It's not about winning, she said when she finished. It's about not losing. We make ourselves smaller, stronger, harder to kill, and we wait for Rourke to make a mistake. Caleb stared at the numbers for a long time. Then he looked at her, and something in his expression had changed. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. I told you I was good with numbers. Yeah, you did. He ran a hand through his hair. This is going to take time. I can't just sell land overnight. I know, but we need to start now before things get worse. They're already worse. Finn found 2 more fences cut today, and someone's been messing with the water supply to the south pasture. Eliza's stomach tightened. Escalation. Yeah. Then we don't have time to waste. He nodded slowly, then held out his hand. Partners?
She looked at his hand, rough, scarred, offered without hesitation, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't romance, wasn't love, but it was real, solid. Partners, she agreed, and shook his hand. That night they ate dinner together for the first time as husband and wife. It was simple food, bread, stew, coffee, but it was warm and filling, and there was enough of it. Eliza hadn't realized how hungry she'd been until she started eating. "Tell me about Rourke," she said after a while. Caleb looked up from his bowl. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Who he is, what he wants, how he operates. If I'm going to help fight him, I need to understand him." So Caleb told her about Silas Rourke, land baron and would-be king of the territory, about how he'd started small and built an empire through a combination of shrewd business and ruthless tactics, about how he controlled the markets, the law, even the newspaper in Cutter's Pass. "He's smart," Caleb said, "and patient. He doesn't come at you head on. He squeezes, makes it impossible to operate, impossible to profit, waits until you're desperate enough to sell for pennies on the dollar. But you won't sell. No. Even if it means losing everything? I won't give him the satisfaction." Eliza studied him across the table. "That's pride talking." "Maybe, but it's also principle. Men like Rourke need to be stopped. If I roll over, he wins. And if he wins here, he'll do it somewhere else. So this is about more than just your land. Always has been." She absorbed that, turning it over. It complicated things, made this fight bigger than just survival. But it also made sense. Caleb Boone was the kind of man who needed something to fight for, not just something to fight against. She could work with that. "Then we make him bleed," she said quietly. Caleb's eyes sharpened. "What?" "He's been bleeding you financially. We return the favor. Find his vulnerabilities, exploit them, make it expensive for him to keep coming after us." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." She pushed her bowl aside. "I need to understand his network, who works for him, who he does business with, where his money comes from. Can you get me that information?" "Some of it, not all." "Then get what you can. I'll work with what we have." He was looking at her differently now, not like a liability or a convenience, but like an asset, an ally. "You're enjoying this," he said. "I'm good at it. There's a difference." "Is there?" Maybe there wasn't. Maybe she was enjoying it, just a little. The challenge, the puzzle, the chance to use her mind instead of just her desperation. "We should sleep," Caleb said, standing. "Tomorrow's going to be busy." "I'll take the couch tonight," Eliza offered. "It's your house. You shouldn't have to—" "No." His voice was firm. "You're recovering. Take the bed. I'm fine where I am." She wanted to argue, but the truth was she was still exhausted, still aching. "Thank you." He nodded and turned away. Then, at the door to the main room, he paused. "Eliza." "Yes?" "I'm glad you answered the notice." The words were simple, almost awkward, but they felt true. "So am I," she said, and meant it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and calculation. Eliza settled into the rhythm of the ranch, learning the routines, the chores, the 100 small tasks that kept the place running. She cooked, cleaned, mended clothes, helped Finn with the chickens. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done in Philadelphia, but it was also oddly satisfying. She felt useful, needed. And at night, she worked on the numbers, built models, ran scenarios, mapped out Rourke's network as best she could with the limited information Caleb brought her. Slowly, a picture emerged, not complete, but enough to see patterns. Weaknesses. Rourke's empire was built on debt and intimidation. He borrowed heavily, using his political connections to secure favorable terms, then used that capital to undercut competitors. It was effective, but it was also fragile. If someone could disrupt his cash flow, even temporarily, the whole structure could wobble. The question was how. Meanwhile, the attacks continued. More fences cut, equipment sabotaged, cattle spooked in the night. Caleb and Finn worked themselves ragged trying to keep up, and Eliza could see the strain wearing on both of them. They needed help, but hiring hands cost money they didn't have, and anyone willing to work for Caleb risked Rourke's wrath. It was a trap. A slow, methodical trap designed to break them. But Eliza had survived worse, and she was damned if she'd break now. Well, the breaking point came on a Tuesday. Eliza was in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard the horses. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw 3 riders coming up the road. They weren't Caleb and Finn. She set down her tools and walked toward the house, her heartbeat picking up. The riders were well-dressed, too clean for ranch work. One of them wore a badge. The sheriff. They stopped at the gate, and the man with the badge tipped his hat. "Ma'am, I'm looking for Caleb Boone. He's out checking the north pasture. Can I help you?" "You his wife?" "I am." The sheriff exchanged glances with the other 2 men. "Then maybe you can. We're here about a complaint filed by Mr. Silas Rourke. Says some of Boone's cattle have been crossing onto his property, damaging crops." Eliza's jaw tightened. "That's a lie. You got proof?" "Do you have proof they're not?" "We have Mr. Rourke's word. And you have mine. Caleb's cattle are accounted for and properly fenced. If they're on Rourke's land, it's because someone drove them there." The sheriff's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am." "So is the one you just made." One of the other men, older, with cold eyes and expensive clothes, spoke up. "You must be the new wife. Heard Boone got himself hitched in a hurry. Desperate times, I suppose." Eliza recognized the tactic, trying to make her feel small, irrelevant. She'd dealt with men like this before. "And you are?" she asked coolly. "Marcus Tate. I work for Mr. Rourke." "Then you can tell Mr. Rourke that if he has a complaint, he can bring it himself instead of hiding behind the sheriff." Tate's eyes hardened. "Careful, Mrs. Boone. You're new here. Don't know how things work yet." "I know exactly how things work. You people manufacture problems so you can manufacture solutions. Well, you're not getting this land. Not through lies, not through intimidation, not through any of your dirty tricks." The sheriff held up a hand. "Ma'am, nobody's trying to take anything. We're just investigating a complaint." "Then investigate. You'll find those cattle were driven onto Rourke's land deliberately to give you an excuse to be here. But you already know that, don't you, Sheriff? Because you're on his payroll, just like everyone else in this godforsaken town." The silence that followed was ice cold. Then Tate smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't stop bullets, Mrs. Boone. You might want to remember that." Before Eliza could respond, Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "If you're threatening my wife, Tate, you'd best have a damn good reason." He was standing at the edge of the property, rifle in hand, Finn beside him. Neither of them looked friendly. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "Nobody's threatening anybody, Caleb. We're just here about the cattle complaint." "Which is bullshit, and you know it." "Still have to check." "Then check and get off my land." Tate's smile widened. "Tough talk for a man who can barely make his mortgage payments. But sure, we'll check. And when we find those cattle on Mr. Rourke's property, you'll be the one answering questions." "Looking forward to it." The riders turned and headed out, but not before Tate gave Eliza one last look, a promise of future trouble. When they were gone, Caleb strode over, his face tight with anger. "What did you say to them?" "The truth. The truth can get you killed out here. So can staying silent." He stared at her, and she stared right back, neither willing to back down. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a harsh sound, bitter and a little wild. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the craziest. Probably both." "Yeah, probably." He sobered, looking in the direction the riders had gone. "This is escalating. They're not even pretending anymore." "Good," Eliza said. "Good?" When people stop pretending, they make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, we exploit them. Caleb shook his head, but there was something almost like admiration in his eyes. "You really think we can win this?" "I think we can survive it. And survival's a kind of winning." "Then let's go make sure those cattle are exactly where they're supposed to be," he said. "Because when the sheriff comes back, I want to shove the truth down his throat." Eliza smiled. "Now you're talking." They found the cattle exactly where Eliza had predicted, driven onto Rourke's land through a gap in the fence that had been deliberately cut. Caleb documented everything, took photographs with an old camera he kept for insurance purposes, gathered evidence, And when the sheriff returned, he laid it all out with cold precision. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but unmoved. "I'll include this in my report." "Which Rourke will bury," Caleb said flatly. "That's not my problem." "No. Your problem is that you're corrupt, and one day that's going to catch up with you." The sheriff's face reddened. "Watch yourself, Boone." "Or what? You'll arrest me? On what charges? Defending my property?" "On whatever charges Mr. Rourke tells me to bring." The honesty of it was almost shocking. The sheriff wasn't even pretending to be impartial anymore. Caleb's hand tightened on his rifle, and for a moment Eliza thought he might actually shoot the man. Then he lowered the weapon. "Get out." The sheriff went, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the wind and thinking about Tate's words. Spirit doesn't stop bullets. It was true. They could be as smart and brave as they wanted, but if Rourke decided to use violence instead of legal pressure, they were outnumbered and outgunned. They needed allies, needed support, needed something to shift the balance. An idea began to form, dangerous, risky, but possible. She got up, pulled on a robe, and went to find Caleb. He was still awake, sitting by the fire, cleaning his rifle. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. "No." She sat down across from him. "I've been thinking." "About?" "About how to fight back. Real fight back, not just defense." He looked up, interested. "I'm listening." Rourke's power comes from control of the markets, the law, the information, but control requires cooperation. If we could break that cooperation, even a little, we might be able to create cracks. How? By going after his allies, finding the people who work for him and showing them that loyalty to Rourke has a cost. Caleb set down the rifle. "You're talking about turning his own people against him. I'm talking about giving them reasons to reconsider their choices. That's dangerous. So is doing nothing." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not the woman who showed up at my door 2 weeks ago. Neither are you the man who posted that notice." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not fighting alone anymore, and that changes things." He smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. "Yeah, I guess it does." They sat there in the firelight, two strangers who'd become allies, and Eliza felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, but trust, partnership, the beginning of something real. "We're going to win this," she said quietly. "Or die trying," Caleb replied. "That too." And in that moment, in the warm glow of the fire, with the frontier night pressing close, Eliza Boone knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, violence, loss, victory, or death, she'd face it standing, not on her knees, not begging, standing, and that was worth everything. The attack came 3 nights later. Eliza woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses thundering past the house. For a split second, she was disoriented, caught between sleep and waking, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Then Caleb was pounding on her door, shouting her name, and everything snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. "Fire! They're burning the barn!" She threw off the covers and ran to the window. Orange flames were already licking up the side of the barn, spreading fast in the dry wood. Dark figures moved in the shadows, men on horseback, circling like wolves. Eliza's heart slammed against her ribs, but her hands were steady as she pulled on her dress and boots. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Caleb was in the main room, loading rifles with quick, practiced movements. Finn burst through the door, his face streaked with soot. "They hit the bunkhouse too," Finn gasped. "Small fire. I got it out, but the barn's going up fast. We need water, now." "How many?" Caleb demanded. 6, maybe 8. Hard to tell in the dark. Caleb thrust a rifle into Eliza's hands. "You know how to use this?" "Point and shoot," she said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "Good enough. Stay here. Watch the windows. Anyone who's not us comes through that door. You fire. Understand?" "I understand." He looked at her for a heartbeat longer, something fierce and protective flashing in his eyes. Then he and Finn were gone, running toward the flames. Eliza moved to the window, rifle clutched tight, and watched the chaos unfold. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames roaring into the night sky. She could see Caleb and Finn frantically working the pump, trying to wet down the surrounding buildings before the fire spread. The riders had pulled back to the edge of the property, dark shapes watching their handiwork. One of them was close to the house. Too close. She could see him clearly in the firelight, a big man with a bandana covering his face. He was moving toward the chicken coop, something in his hand that glinted. More fire. He was going to burn everything. Eliza raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel the way her father had taught her years ago when she was just a girl and the world was simpler. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath came steady. She fired. The shot went wide. She'd been aiming for his shoulder, trying to wound, not kill, but it was close enough. The man jerked back, his horse rearing, and whatever he'd been holding fell to the ground. He wheeled around, searching for where the shot had come from, and Eliza fired again. This time she hit the fence post 6 inches from his head. The message was clear. Come closer, and the next one goes through you. The man hesitated, then spurred his horse and retreated to join the others. They clustered together, conferring, and for a moment Eliza thought they might charge the house. Then one of them pointed toward the road. Lights were approaching, wagons, lanterns, people responding to the fire. The town might be in Rourke's pocket, but nobody wanted to see the whole valley burn. The riders scattered like smoke, disappearing into the darkness before the help arrived. Eliza lowered the rifle, her arms shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Through the window, she could see Caleb and Finn still fighting the fire with the help of the newcomers. The barn was lost, but they might save the rest. She set the rifle down and went outside to help. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of smoke and water and exhaustion. By the time the sun rose, the barn was nothing but charred timber and ash, but everything else had been saved. The house, the bunkhouse, the other outbuildings, they'd held, barely. Eliza sat on the porch steps, her dress soaked and filthy, her face streaked with soot. Around her, the neighbors who'd come to help were packing up their equipment, avoiding eye contact. Most of them worked for Rourke in some capacity or depended on him for their livelihoods. They'd help fight a fire because that was what decent people did, but they wouldn't stand with Caleb against the man who'd ordered it set. Fear was a powerful motivator. Caleb came to sit beside her, moving like every muscle hurt. His face was grim, his eyes red from smoke. "You fired those shots," he said quietly. "I did." "Hit anything?" "The fence, and the man's pride, I hope." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You probably saved the chicken coop. He was going to torch it." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful, despite everything.
Or maybe because of it, beauty was always sharper when you just stared death in the face. "This is only going to get worse," Caleb said finally. "I know that too. I can't ask you to stay. This isn't what you signed up for." Eliza turned to look at him, this hard man who'd offered her a lifeline when she had nothing, who'd kept his promises, treated her with respect, trusted her with his books and his problems, who was giving her an out even though he needed her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Eliza, I said I'm not going anywhere." She stood, joints protesting. "They want us to run, to give up. I've been running my whole life, Caleb. From debt, from bad situations, from men who thought they could break me. I'm done running." "This isn't about running. It's about surviving." "Then we survived together. That was the deal, wasn't it? Partners." He looked up at her, and something in his expression cracked open. Not love, not yet, but something close to it.
Something that mattered. "Partners," he agreed. The last of the neighbors were leaving, their wagons rumbling down the road. One of them, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, paused at the gate and called out to Eliza. "Mrs. Boone, you need anything? You send word. I can't help openly, but I can spare some eggs, maybe some bread. A woman shouldn't have to face this alone." It was a small gesture, a tiny crack in Rourke's wall of control, but it was something. "Thank you," Eliza called back. "I'll remember that." The woman nodded and drove on. Finn emerged from the wreckage of the barn, his face exhausted. "We lost most of the equipment, tools, saddles, feed stores. We can rebuild, but it'll take money we don't have." "Make a list," Eliza said. "Everything we lost, everything we need, we'll figure it out. Finn looked at Caleb, who nodded. Do what she says. When Finn had gone, Caleb stood and faced Eliza. You really think we can come back from this? I think we have to try, and I think Rourke just made his first real mistake. What mistake? He showed his hand. He's not using legal pressure anymore. He's using violence. That means he's desperate, or he's getting impatient. Either way, desperate men make errors in judgment. Or they get more dangerous. That too. Eliza squared her shoulders. But we're not helpless. We're not alone. And we're not giving up. So let's get to work. The first thing Eliza did was ride into town. Caleb didn't want her to go, argued that it was too dangerous, that Rourke's people would be watching, but Eliza was firm. If they were going to fight back, they needed information, needed to understand exactly who and what they were dealing with, and she needed to stop being invisible. She borrowed Caleb's second-best horse and rode into Cutter's Pass just after noon, when the streets were busy and witnesses were plentiful. She wore her cleanest dress and held her head high, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her. The new wife, the woman who'd fired on Rourke's men. Let them look, let them talk. Her first stop was the general store. The owner, Mr. Hendricks, was a nervous little man who depended on Rourke for credit to stock his shelves. He blanched when Eliza walked in. Mrs. Boone, I heard about the fire. Terrible thing. It was arson, Eliza said pleasantly. But you probably already knew that. I don't know anything about... I need supplies. Nails, rope, lamp oil, flour, salt. Can you provide them on credit? Hendricks wiped his sweating forehead. Mrs. Boone, I'd like to help, but with your husband's financial situation... My husband's financial situation is none of your concern. The question is whether you're willing to do business with us or whether you're completely in Silas Rourke's pocket. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, Mr. Hendricks. But fair or not, I need those supplies. And you need customers who aren't beholden to a man who burns down barns in the middle of the night. The store went quiet. Other customers had stopped pretending not to listen. Hendricks looked trapped, his eyes darting to the other shoppers. I can give you some items, not everything, and you'll have to pay half now. It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was more than nothing. Done. She paid with coins from the small emergency fund Caleb had given her and left with as much as she could carry. As she loaded the supplies onto her horse, she felt eyes on her. Not hostile exactly, but measuring, calculating. People were starting to wonder if maybe the Boones weren't as beaten as they seemed. Her second stop was the newspaper office. The Cutter's Pass Chronicle was a two-man operation run by an editor named Thomas Wright and his assistant. Wright was young for an editor, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and the wary look of someone who'd learned to watch what he printed. He stood when Eliza entered, surprise crossing his face. Mrs. Boone, this is unexpected. I have a story for you, Eliza said without preamble. I'm sure you do, but... Our barn was burned down 2 nights ago by men working for Silas Rourke. We have witnesses, we have evidence, and I want you to print it. Wright's expression shuddered. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Truth is complicated in this town, Mrs. Boone. So you won't print it because you're afraid of Rourke. I won't print unsubstantiated claims that could result in a libel suit and destroy this paper. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Look, I sympathize with your situation. I do. But printing what you're asking would be professional suicide. Eliza had expected this, but hearing it still stung. What if I had proof? Real, documented proof of corruption? What kind of proof? Financial records? Contracts showing market manipulation? Evidence of bribery and intimidation? Wright's interest sharpened. You have that? Not yet, but I know where to look for it. She stepped closer. Rourke's empire is built on dirty deals and scared people, but empires fall when the truth comes out. Help me expose him, and you'll have the biggest story this territory has ever seen. Or I'll have a funeral to attend, probably my own. Maybe. Or maybe you'll have a chance to do what you became a journalist to do, tell the truth and damn the consequences. They stared at each other across the dusty office, and Eliza could see him wavering. Want warring with fear. Get me proof, Wright said finally. Real, verifiable proof. Not speculation, not hearsay. Documents, testimony, something that will stand up in court. You get me that, and I'll print it.
Even if it costs you.
Even if it costs me, he smiled grimly. Hell, maybe it's time someone in this town grew a spine. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. And Mrs. Boone, watch your back. Rourke doesn't like people who fight back. Neither do I, Eliza said, and left. She made 2 more stops, the land office, where she requested copies of recent property transfers, and the hotel, where she asked pointed questions about who'd been staying there the night of the fire, before heading back to the ranch. By the time she arrived, the sun was setting and Caleb was pacing the porch like a caged animal. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded as she dismounted. "Working." "You said you were going to town for supplies, not—" "I got supplies. And information. And the beginning of an alliance." She told him about Hendricks, about Wright, about the small cracks she'd started to create in Rourke's wall. Caleb listened, his expression shifting from anger to grudging admiration. "You're either going to save us or get us killed," he said when she finished. "Probably both." He shook his head, but there was warmth in his eyes. "Come on. Finn's got dinner ready, and we need to talk strategy." They ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, and for the first time since the fire, the mood felt almost hopeful. Eliza laid out her plan. Gather evidence, build a case, use the press to expose Rourke's corruption. It was risky, maybe impossible, but it was a plan. "We'll need help," Finn said. "Can't do this alone." "I know. That's why we're going to start talking to the other ranchers, quietly. Find out who else is suffering under Rourke's thumb." Caleb frowned. "Most of them are too scared to act." "Then we show them they're not alone. We show them there's a chance. And if they still won't help, then we fight anyway." The conversation stretched late into the night, plans forming and reforming, problems identified and solutions proposed. By the time Finn excused himself to get some sleep, Eliza's head was buzzing with possibilities. She and Caleb sat in companionable silence for a while, the house settling around them. Finally, Caleb spoke. "You're changing things here. You know that." "I'm trying to survive, same as you." "No, it's more than that." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You're making people believe again, making them think maybe they don't have to live in fear." "Do you believe?" "I'm starting to." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went deeper than partnership, warmer than mere alliance. Eliza felt it settle in her chest, foreign and a little frightening. "We should sleep," she said, standing quickly. "Eliza." She paused at the doorway. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for everything." "We're partners," she said softly. "That's what partners do." But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she knew it was becoming something more than that. Something she hadn't planned for and didn't know how to handle. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning brought a visitor. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw the buggy approaching. A fancy rig pulled by matched horses, driven by a woman in an expensive traveling dress. She set down the wet sheets and walked to meet her, curious. The woman who climbed down from the buggy was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She looked Eliza over with the assessing gaze of someone used to making quick judgments. "You must be the new Mrs. Boone," she said without preamble. "I am, and you are." "Margaret Hartley. I own the Triple H Ranch about 10 miles south of here." She glanced around the property, taking in the burned barn, the signs of recent struggle. "I heard about the fire. Thought I'd come see for myself." "Kind of you." Not kind, practical. "Rourke's been squeezing me too. Thought maybe it was time to compare notes." Eliza's pulse quickened. "An ally. A real one. Would you like to come inside? I just made coffee." "I'd like that very much." They sat at the kitchen table, 2 women sizing each other up over steaming cups. Margaret Hartley, Eliza quickly learned, was a widow who'd been running her ranch alone for 5 years since her husband died. She was tough, capable, and deeply angry at Silas Rourke. "He's been after my water rights," Margaret said bluntly. "Offers to buy them, but the price is insultingly low. When I refuse, suddenly my cattle get sick, my fences get cut,
My hired hands quit. Same pattern, every time. Have you documented any of it? Some. Not enough to prove anything in court. What if we pooled our evidence, combined resources? Margaret's eyes sharpened. You're thinking of taking him on legally. I'm thinking of taking him on every way we can. Legal, financial, public opinion, all of it. That's ambitious. That's survival. Margaret smiled, and it was a fierce expression. I like you, Eliza Boone. You've got sand. She set down her cup. All right, I'm in. What do you need? They spent the next 2 hours planning. Margaret knew other ranchers who were suffering under Rourke's thumb, people who might be willing to act if they thought there was a real chance. She also knew which of Rourke's employees were unhappy, who might be convinced to turn if the incentive was right. By the time she left, they had the skeleton of a real strategy. Be careful, Margaret said as she climbed back into her buggy. Rourke doesn't take challenges well. He'll come after you harder now. Let him come. I'm not backing down. No, I can see that. Margaret gathered her reins. There's a ranchers' meeting next week in town, usually just social, but I think we could use it. Get people talking. Will Rourke be there? Probably, but that's good. Let him see us organizing. Let him worry. Eliza smiled. I like the way you think. When Caleb came home that evening, Eliza told him about Margaret's visit. His reaction was cautious but pleased. Hartley's solid. If she's with us, others might follow. That's what I'm counting on. Over the next week, they worked systematically to build their coalition. Margaret introduced them to other ranchers, carefully, quietly, in ones and twos so as not to attract attention. Some were too frightened to help, but others, worn down by years of Rourke's pressure, were ready to fight back. A picture began to emerge of a territory held hostage by one man's greed and protected by everyone's fear. But fear, Eliza was learning, could be broken. It just took courage from someone willing to go first. The ranchers' meeting was held in the community hall on a Saturday night. Eliza dressed carefully, wearing her best dress and putting up her hair. She wanted to look respectable, unthreatening, someone the other ranchers' wives could relate to. The hall was crowded when they arrived, filled with the smell of food and the sound of conversation. Eliza could feel the eyes on her as she entered with Caleb, the curiosity, the judgment, the whispers. The woman who'd married Caleb Boone in a desperate bargain and then fired on Rourke's men. She held her head high and smiled. Silas Rourke was there, holding court near the refreshment table. He was older than Eliza had imagined, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of distinguished looks that came from money and power. He wore his authority like a second skin, comfortable and absolute. Their eyes met across the room, and Eliza felt the temperature drop. This was the enemy, the man who'd tried to burn them out, who'd been systematically destroying their lives. He smiled, a cold, predatory smile, and raised his glass in mock salute. Eliza smiled back and turned away. Let him think she was intimidated. Let him underestimate her. It would make his fall that much sweeter. The evening proceeded with painful civility. People ate, drank, made small talk about weather and cattle prices. But underneath the pleasantries, Eliza could feel the tension, the unspoken conflicts, the careful dance of who spoke to whom and who pointedly didn't. She made her rounds, introducing herself, being polite and friendly. Several women were cool to her, their loyalty to Rourke or their fear of him making them wary. But a few were kind. A few seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. Small victories. Halfway through the evening, Rourke approached. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who owned the room, people parting for him instinctively. Mrs. Boone, he said smoothly. We haven't been properly introduced. Silas Rourke. I know who you are, Eliza said evenly. And I know who you are. The brave little wife who shot at my men. His smile didn't reach his eyes. That took courage. Or foolishness. I haven't decided which. Your men were on my property, burning my barn. I'd say that was self-defense. A terrible misunderstanding. I was horrified to hear about the fire. I'm sure you were. They stood there, two predators circling, both aware that half the room was watching this exchange. You're new to the territory, Rourke said conversationally. Perhaps you don't understand how things work here. There's a natural order. Some people lead, others follow. Knowing which you are can save a lot of unnecessary pain. And which are you suggesting I am? I'm suggesting that your husband is in an untenable position. He's fighting a battle he can't win. The smart move would be to negotiate. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer for his property. We're not interested. You haven't heard my offer. We're not interested, Eliza repeated, her voice hard as stone.
Rourke's genial mask slipped just slightly.
You should be careful, Mrs. Boone. Accidents happen on frontier ranches, fires, accidents with livestock, people getting hurt. He leaned in slightly. Would be a shame if something happened to that pretty face of yours. Every instinct screamed at Eliza to step back, to show fear. But she'd been dealing with bullies her whole life, and she knew the game. She stepped closer instead, dropping her voice so only he could hear. If anything happens to me or mine, I have documents that will be sent directly to the territorial governor. Documents detailing every illegal thing you've done in this valley, every bribe, every threat, every manipulated contract. You touch us, and your empire comes down. Do we understand each other? It was a bluff. She didn't have those documents yet, but her voice was steady and sure. Rourke's eyes narrowed. You're lying. Am I? Do you want to test that theory? For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Rourke stepped back, his smile returning but with a harder edge. You're an interesting woman, Mrs. Boone. We'll speak again. I'm sure we will. He moved away, but Eliza could feel the weight of his attention on her for the rest of the evening. She'd made an enemy, a powerful, dangerous enemy, but she'd also shown him she wouldn't be intimidated. Caleb found her shortly after, his face tight. What did he say to you? He threatened us. I threatened him back. Eliza, I know it was risky, but he needed to know we're not afraid. Even if we are? Especially if we are. They left soon after, riding home in tense silence. But as they approached the ranch, Caleb reached over and took her hand. You were magnificent tonight, he said quietly. I was terrified. I know, that's what made it magnificent. The warmth in his voice made her chest tight. She squeezed his hand, holding on perhaps longer than necessary, and tried to ignore the way her heart was starting to betray her. The retaliation came 2 days later. Eliza was in the garden when Finn came running, his face pale. You need to come see this. They'd found the cattle in the south pasture, 10 head poisoned, dead and bloating in the sun, a clear message written in flesh and waste. Caleb stood over the carnage, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He's escalating. We need to document this, Eliza said, fighting down nausea. Photographs, samples if we can get them tested. What's the point? The sheriff won't do anything. The sheriff won't. But the territorial authorities might. If we can build a big enough case, that takes time we don't have. Then we make time. She turned to Finn. Can you get me samples from the carcasses? Whatever they were poisoned with, maybe someone can identify it. Finn nodded, looking sick but determined. They spent the rest of the day dealing with the dead cattle, documenting everything, taking samples, disposing of the bodies. It was grim, exhausting work, and by the time they finished, they were all filthy and demoralized. That night, Eliza sat at the desk in the ranch office writing letters, one to the territorial governor detailing the attacks and asking for an investigation, one to a lawyer in Denver that Margaret had recommended, one to a veterinarian who might be able to test the samples. She was sealing the last envelope when Caleb came in. You should sleep, he said. So should you. He sat down across from her, looking older than his years. This is getting out of hand. Maybe we should consider Rourke's offer. Take what we can get and start over somewhere else. Eliza set down her pen. Is that what you really want? I want you safe. I'm as safe here as I'd be anywhere. Rourke's reach is long, Caleb. If we run, he'll just find someone else to terrorize. Someone who might not fight back. That's not our problem. Yes, it is. We made it our problem when we decided to stand. He rubbed his face, exhausted. I never wanted this for you. Never wanted to drag you into a war. You didn't drag me. I walked in with my eyes open. She stood and moved around the desk, surprising herself by reaching out to touch his shoulder. We're going to win this. I don't know how yet, but we will. He looked up at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes took her breath away. How are you so sure? Because we have to be. Because people are counting on us. Because, she paused, searching for the right words. Because I'm tired of powerful men thinking they can take whatever they want, and I think you are too. Slowly he reached up and covered her hand with his. When did this stop being about survival? Maybe it never was. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by touch and purpose, and something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. Then Caleb stood, bringing them face to face, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Eliza. A crash from outside shattered the moment. They both jumped, Caleb already reaching for his rifle as running footsteps pounded on the porch. Finn burst through the door. Riders coming, at least 6, moving fast. Rourke? Caleb demanded. Don't know. They're still a ways out, but get the rifles. Now. They moved into defensive positions, Eliza by the window with a loaded rifle, Caleb at the door, Finn covering the back. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. If this was another attack, they'd be ready. The riders came into view, and Caleb tensed. Then he lowered his weapon. It's Hartley, and she's brought company. Margaret Hartley rode at the head of a group of 6 riders, 4 men and another woman, all armed and looking grim. They stopped at the gate, and Margaret called out, We heard about the cattle. Came to make sure you were all right. Caleb opened the door and stepped out, Eliza close behind. We're fine. What's this about? This, Margaret said, is about standing together. These folks are tired of Rourke's bullying. We figured it was time to make that clear. One of the men, a grizzled rancher Eliza recognized from the meeting, nodded. Hartley says you're planning to fight back. Legal-like. We want in. Eliza felt something crack open in her chest. Relief. Hope. Vindication. They weren't alone anymore. Come inside, she said. We need to talk strategy. They crowded into the main room, a ragtag group of angry, frightened, determined people. Eliza laid out everything they'd been planning, the evidence gathering, the legal strategy, the plan to expose Rourke through the press and the courts. It's risky, she warned. He'll come after all of us harder when he realizes what we're doing. He's already coming after us, one of the ranchers said. Might as well make it mean something. They talked late into the night, pooling information and resources. Each person had a piece of the puzzle, a contract that didn't quite add up, a witness to intimidation, records of suspicious transactions. Separately, they were meaningless. Together, they started to form a picture. By the time the group left just before dawn, they had a plan. A real one, with moving parts and contingencies and actual hope for success. Eliza stood on the porch with Caleb and watched them ride away, the sky lightening in the east. We might actually pull this off, Caleb said wonderingly. We will pull this off. He turned to her, and in the growing light she could see everything he was feeling written plainly on his face. Fear, determination, and something else, something warm and fierce and entirely unexpected. I need to tell you something, he said. What? This marriage, this thing between us, it's not what I thought it would be. Eliza's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean, it was supposed to be practical, convenient, but somewhere along the way it became... He stopped, struggling for words. You became important, not just for the ranch or the fight, for me. She should have been prepared for this, should have seen it coming, but hearing the words out loud still shocked her. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything. I know this wasn't part of the deal. I just needed you to know. He started to turn away. Wait. Eliza caught his arm, her heart racing. You're right. This wasn't part of the deal, but maybe the deal changed. He looked at her with such naked hope it made her chest ache. I don't know what this is, she said carefully. I don't know what it's becoming, but I know I care about you, about this place, about what we're building together, and that terrifies me. Why? Because caring means having something to lose. You already have something to lose, Caleb said softly. We both do. She knew he was right.
knew that somewhere between that first desperate night and now, this had stopped being about mere survival and become about something far more dangerous, about building a life, about building a future, about building something worth fighting for. "Then let's make sure we don't lose it," she whispered. And when he pulled her close, when his arms came around her solid and sure, Eliza let herself lean into the embrace, let herself feel, just for a moment, what it was like to not be alone. They stood there as the sun rose, two people who'd started as strangers and become allies, and were now teetering on the edge of something more. The fight with Rourke was far from over. The danger was real and growing. But for the first time since she'd collapsed in the dust of Cutter's Pass all those weeks ago, Eliza believed they might actually win, and that was worth every risk. The moment shattered when Finn cleared his throat from the doorway, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes knowing. Eliza stepped back from Caleb's embrace, suddenly aware of how exposed they'd been standing there in the growing daylight. "Sorry to interrupt," Finn said, not sounding sorry at all. "But we've got another problem. Jenkins just rode up. Says Rourke's called a special town council meeting for tomorrow. Something about new ordinances regarding property maintenance and livestock management." Caleb's expression hardened. "He's going after us through the law now." "Looks that way." Eliza's mind was already racing, shifting from the personal back to the tactical. "What kind of ordinances?" Jenkins wasn't sure, but anything Rourke pushes through council is designed to hurt someone, usually us. "Then we need to be at that meeting," Eliza said, "and we need to bring everyone we can. Make sure he knows we're not going to roll over." Caleb looked at her with something like pride. "You're thinking of making a stand." "I'm thinking of making sure our voices get heard. There's a difference between rolling over and fighting smart." They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Eliza drafted a letter to the territorial governor's office, outlining the pattern of harassment and requesting an investigation. It was a long shot. Territorial authorities rarely intervened in local disputes, but it established a paper trail, evidence that they'd tried to work within the system. By afternoon, word had spread through their small network. Margaret arrived with 2 other ranchers. More trickled in throughout the day, until they had nearly 15 people committed to attending the council meeting. "This is good," Margaret said, surveying the group assembled in the Boone's main room. "Rourke's used to intimidating people one at a time. He won't expect a unified front." "He'll adapt," warned James Cooper, one of the older ranchers. "Man didn't build his empire by being stupid." "No," Eliza agreed, "but he built it on fear. And fear only works when people feel isolated. Tomorrow, we show him we're not isolated anymore." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, thinking about everything that could go wrong. Rourke was powerful, connected, ruthless. He had the sheriff, the bank, half the town council in his pocket. What did they have? A handful of scared ranchers and a plan that depended on exposing corruption in a system that benefited from that corruption. The odds were terrible, but doing nothing was worse. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to pre-dawn light and the smell of coffee. Caleb was already up, moving quietly in the kitchen. When she emerged, he handed her a cup without a word. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Kept thinking about what happens if this goes wrong. If Rourke decides we've pushed too far, then we deal with it, together." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You say that like it's simple." "Nothing about this is simple, but the alternative is giving up, and I won't do that. I can't." They rode into town just after noon, arriving to find the street outside the council hall already crowded. Eliza felt eyes on them as they dismounted. Some curious, some hostile, some carefully neutral. Rourke's influence was everywhere, and people were weighing which side to stand on. Margaret was waiting on the steps with her contingent. "Good turnout," she said quietly. "Better than I expected. Where's Rourke?" "Inside. Been here since this morning, making sure everything's arranged to his liking." The council chamber was a converted warehouse, hot and stuffy, despite the open windows. Wooden benches faced a raised platform where 5 council members sat behind a long table. Silas Rourke stood to one side, looking every inch the respectable businessman in his expensive suit. His eyes found Eliza the moment she entered, and his expression didn't change, but she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. They took seats in the middle section, their group clustering together. Other ranchers they'd recruited sat scattered throughout the room, not obviously affiliated, but present, watching. The council chairman, a portly man named Dutton, who owned the bank, called the meeting to order. We have several items on today's agenda. First, proposed ordinances regarding livestock management and property maintenance standards. Rourke stepped forward. Mr. Chairman, if I may, these ordinances are necessary to protect our community's standards and property values. We've seen an increase in poorly maintained properties that pose fire hazards and health risks to neighbors. It was smoothly done, the language carefully neutral.
But everyone in the room knew who he was targeting. The proposed ordinances would require all ranch properties to maintain structures to code, keep adequate fire breaks, and ensure livestock are properly contained, Rourke continued. Properties failing to meet these standards would be subject to fines, and in extreme cases could be condemned. Caleb's hand clenched on his knee. Eliza could feel the anger radiating off him. This is a reasonable request, Dutton said. Public safety should be our priority. I'd like to speak, Eliza said, standing. The room went quiet. Women rarely spoke at council meetings, and when they did, it was usually about schools or social matters. Not this. Dutton looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Boone, this isn't really— I'm a property owner in this territory, Eliza interrupted firmly. That gives me the right to speak on matters affecting my property. She could see Rourke's jaw tighten, but he said nothing. Go ahead, Dutton said reluctantly. Eliza moved to the aisle where everyone could see her. She'd dressed carefully that morning, respectable but not fancy, a working woman's clothes. She wanted them to see her as one of them, not as some outsider making trouble. These ordinances sound reasonable on the surface, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the hot room. Who could object to safety standards? But let's be honest about what this is really about. This is about giving certain people the power to harass and intimidate property owners they want to drive out. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Our barn burned down 3 weeks ago, Eliza continued. Arson, plain and simple. We lost equipment, feed, and nearly lost more. Now you want to pass an ordinance that would let you fine us for not having a barn? For not meeting arbitrary standards that can be interpreted however certain council members see fit? That's not what this is about, Rourke interjected smoothly. These are standard safety measures. Standard according to whom? Eliza shot back. Show me another territory that requires these specific standards. Show me the fire marshal reports or health department studies that justify this. You can't, because they don't exist. This is targeted harassment dressed up as policy. The room erupted in conversation. Dutton banged his gavel. Order! Mrs. Boone, you're out of line. Am I? Because I have documentation here. She pulled papers from her bag, showing a pattern of properties being targeted for violations only after their owners refused to sell to certain interested parties. I have witness statements. I have financial records showing coordinated efforts to drive down property values in specific areas. She was bluffing on some of it. The documentation wasn't as complete as she made it sound, but her voice was confident and strong. Rourke's expression finally cracked, anger flashing through. Those are serious accusations, Mrs. Boone. I hope you have evidence to back them up. I have enough to request a full territorial investigation, Eliza said. In fact, I've already sent a formal complaint to the governor's office. I'm sure they'll be very interested in how public policy is being used for private gain in this territory. The silence that followed was absolute. No one had ever challenged Rourke this publicly, this directly. Then Margaret stood. I'd like to speak as well. And one by one, other ranchers stood, James Cooper, Sarah Brennan, Tom Whitfield, each one adding their voice, their story, their piece of the pattern. Dutton looked increasingly panicked, his eyes darting to Rourke for guidance. The other council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This is highly irregular, Dutton protested weakly. What's irregular is trying to ram through ordinances that clearly benefit one man at the expense of everyone else, Margaret said sharply. We're not leaving this room until this proposal is tabled and a proper investigation is opened into the abuse of council authority. The crowd was rumbling now, voices raised in agreement and argument. Eliza could see the careful calculations happening on the council members' faces. Rourke had power, yes, but he didn't have everyone. And a unified block of voters was harder to ignore than scattered individuals. Perhaps we should table this matter, one of the council members said, a younger man named Harrison, who'd always seemed uncomfortable with Rourke's influence. Give people time to review the proposals, hear public comment properly. That's not necessary, Rourke started. I second the motion to table, another council member cut in. Dutton looked trapped. Protocol required a vote on the motion, and he couldn't refuse without making himself look like Rourke's puppet. All in favor of tabling the ordinances pending further review? 3 hands went up. It was enough. Rourke's face went carefully blank, but Eliza could see the fury in his eyes. She'd humiliated him publicly, challenged his control, and won, at least this round. This meeting is adjourned, Dutton said quickly, clearly wanting to escape before things got worse. The crowd dispersed slowly, people clustered in groups talking in low voices. Eliza felt hands on her shoulder. Margaret, congratulating her. Other ranchers nodding their approval. For the first time, there was something like hope in their faces. But Eliza was watching Rourke. He stood at the front of the room, conferring with Dutton and Tate, his enforcer. When he looked up and caught her gaze, his smile was cold and promised retribution. Caleb appeared at her elbow. We need to leave. Now. Agreed. They moved toward the exit, their group forming a protective cluster around them. As they passed Rourke, he stepped into their path. Mrs. Boone, that was quite a performance. It was the truth. Truth is a matter of perspective, and perspective can be very dangerous. He glanced at Caleb. You should teach your wife to be more careful. Accidents happen to people who make themselves targets. Is that a threat? Caleb's voice was ice. It's a fact. Rourke's gaze returned to Eliza. You've made a powerful enemy today. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. I'm prepared for whatever comes, Eliza said steadily. The question is whether you're prepared for people to finally stand up to you. We'll see. They left him standing there, but Eliza's hands were shaking by the time they reached the horses. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her shaky and aware of how badly this could have gone. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most reckless, Margaret said quietly. Probably both. He's going to retaliate. You know that. Let him try. We're not alone anymore. But as they rode back to the ranch, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just crossed a line. The fight had been simmering before, contained to economic pressure and isolated incidents. Now it was open warfare. And in warfare, people got hurt. The retaliation came faster than expected. 2 days after the council meeting, Caleb received notice from the bank. His loan was being called in. Full payment due within 30 days or the property would be foreclosed. Eliza stared at the letter, her mind racing through numbers. They can't do this. The loan isn't due for another 6 months. There's a clause, Caleb said flatly. Default on any terms allows them to accelerate payment. They're claiming I missed a payment last month. Did you? No, but they're saying they never received it. My word against theirs. It was elegant in its brutality. Rourke couldn't win at the council, so he'd gone to Dutton at the bank. They'd manufacture a default and take the property legally. How much do we need? Eliza asked. Caleb showed her the number. It was staggering, more than they could possibly raise in 30 days. We could sell the north parcels, Eliza said slowly. The ones we were planning to liquidate anyway. If we can find a buyer fast, won't be enough, not even close. Then we borrow from the other ranchers. Pool resources. They don't have that kind of money either. We're all in the same boat. Eliza paced the room, her mind working through possibilities and discarding them as fast as they formed. There had to be a way. Some angle they hadn't considered. What about going to a different bank? One outside Rourke's influence? Takes time to establish credit, and word's probably already spread that we're a bad risk. So we're trapped. Looks that way. The defeat in his voice made her chest ache. After everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, to lose it over manufactured debt felt impossibly cruel. No, Eliza said firmly. There has to be another way. If you find one, let me know. She worked through the night, going over the books again and again, looking for something they'd missed, some asset they could liquidate, some creditor who might extend terms. But the math was unforgiving. At dawn, exhausted and no closer to an answer, she finally admitted they might actually lose. The ranch, the fight, everything. Caleb found her asleep at the desk, her head pillowed on a ledger. He touched her shoulder gently. Eliza, wake up. She jerked awake, disoriented. What time is it? Just past 7. You've been working all night. I couldn't find anything. Every scenario I run, we come up short. He pulled up a chair sitting close. Maybe it's time to face facts. We gave it our best shot, but Rourke has too many advantages. Too much power. So we just give up? Let him win? We save what we can and start over somewhere else. It's not giving up, it's surviving. Eliza wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness of it. But looking at Caleb's tired face, seeing the toll this fight had taken on him, she couldn't find the words. I'm sorry, she whispered. I pushed us to fight back and now No, don't apologize. You were right to push. We made him bleed, made him work for it. That's worth something. Not if we lose everything. We won't lose everything. He took her hand. We'll still have each other. That's more than I had before you came. The simple honesty of it broke something in her chest. She'd married this man as a business transaction, a desperate bid for survival. But somewhere in the fighting and planning and late-night strategy sessions, he'd become more than that. He'd become partner, ally, friend, maybe even more than friend. I'm not ready to quit yet, she said. Then we'll keep fighting. But we need to be realistic about our chances. A knock at the door interrupted them. Finn poked his head in, looking excited. You've got a visitor. Says it's urgent. The visitor was Thomas Wright, the newspaper editor. He stood in the main room, hat in hand, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. Mr. Wright, Eliza said, surprised. What brings you here? I've been doing some digging. After your speech at the council meeting, I started asking questions, pulling records. He set a folder on the table. I think I found something. Eliza opened the folder. Inside were property deeds, loan documents, and what looked like bank transfer records. What am I looking at? Evidence of fraud. Rourke's been using the bank to manipulate property values. He makes loans to people he knows can't pay, then forecloses when they default. But here's the thing. The foreclosures happen at artificially low values, which Rourke then buys through shell companies. He's been systematically stealing land for pennies on the dollar. Caleb leaned over Eliza's shoulder, scanning the documents. How'd you get these? I have a source inside the bank, someone who's sick of what's been happening. Wright's expression was grim. This is enough to bring criminal charges, not just civil suits, actual fraud prosecution. Eliza's heart was hammering. Can you prove the connection between Rourke and the shell companies? Not yet, but if we can get a proper investigation started, subpoena the full records, the territorial authorities won't move without concrete proof, Caleb interrupted. We've been down this road. Then we don't go to the territorial authorities, Eliza said slowly. We go to the federal government. This is mail fraud, wire fraud, possibly racketeering. Those are federal crimes. Wright's eyes widened. That would bring in federal marshals, federal prosecutors. People Rourke can't buy or intimidate, Eliza finished. At least not as easily. It's risky, Caleb warned. If we accuse him of federal crimes and can't prove it, he'll bury us. He's already trying to bury us. This gives us a fighting chance. They spent the next hour going through Wright's documents, piecing together the pattern. It was complex, deliberately obscured through layers of shell companies and straw buyers, but the pattern was there for anyone willing to look. I'll need more, Eliza said finally. More documents, more connections, enough that when we bring this to federal authorities, they can't ignore it. My source might be able to get more, Wright said. But we need to move fast. If Rourke finds out we're digging, then we move fast. Eliza looked at Caleb. How long do we have before the bank forecloses? 28 days. Then that's our deadline. We get the evidence, present it to the federal marshal, and pray they act before Rourke takes everything. It was a desperate plan, dependent on people they didn't know and evidence they didn't yet have. But it was something, a chance. Caleb looked at Wright. You're sure about this? Going after Rourke this hard, he'll come for you. He's been coming for all of us for years, just doing it slow so we didn't notice. Wright squared his shoulders. I became a journalist to expose corruption and speak truth to power. Time I actually did it. After Wright left, Eliza and Caleb sat in silence, the weight of what they'd just set in motion settling over them. "This could work," Caleb said finally. "Or it could get us killed." "That too." He turned to her. "You don't have to do this. You could leave, go somewhere safe while this plays out." "We've been over this. I'm not leaving." "Eliza, I'm not leaving you." The words came out fierce, brooking no argument. "We're in this together. Partners, remember?" He pulled her close, and she went willingly, letting herself be held. They stood like that for a long moment, taking comfort in each other's presence. "When did you become the strong one?" Caleb murmured into her hair. "I've always been strong. I just didn't have anything worth being strong for until now." The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity. Wright's source inside the bank provided more documents, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Eliza worked with Margaret and the other ranchers to gather testimony, building a comprehensive picture of Rourke's corruption. They worked in secret, meeting in barns and remote locations, always watching for Rourke's spies. The tension was constant, the fear that they'd be discovered before they had enough proof. Meanwhile, Rourke kept up the pressure. More harassment, more legal complications. He was confident they couldn't stop the foreclosure, so he was already planning his next moves. But he didn't know what they were building, didn't know the trap they were laying. 15 days before the foreclosure deadline, Eliza rode to the territorial capital with a folder full of evidence. The federal marshal's office was in a nondescript building, and the marshal himself was a lean, weathered man named Coleman, who listened to her presentation with an expressionless face. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "These are serious allegations. They're documented facts. Documentation can be forged. Then investigate. Send someone to verify the records. Interview the victims." Eliza leaned forward. "Marshal Coleman, a man is using his position to systematically steal land from families who've worked it for generations. He's corrupting local government, manipulating financial institutions, and using violence when legal means fail. If that's not worth federal intervention, what is?" Coleman studied her for a long moment. "You understand that starting an investigation doesn't mean we can stop a legal foreclosure. Even if everything you are saying is true, the bank's claim might still be valid." "I understand. But at least it puts Rourke on notice, shows him he can't operate with impunity, and paints a target on your back even bigger than the one you already have. I'm aware of the risks." He tapped the folder. "I'll need to review this with my superior. If we decide to move forward, it'll take time, weeks, maybe months to build a case. We might not have months. The foreclosure happens in 2 weeks. Then I suggest you find a way to delay it, Mrs. Boone, because federal investigations don't move on anyone's timeline but their own." It wasn't the answer she'd hoped for, but it was something. She rode back to Boone Ridge with a fragile sense of hope and the knowledge that they'd done everything they could. Now they just had to survive long enough to see it through. The attack came on a moonless night, 9 days before the foreclosure. Eliza woke to gunshots and shouting. She rolled out of bed, grabbed the rifle she now kept beside her, and ran for the main room. Caleb was already there, returning fire through the windows. "How many?" she shouted over the noise. 10, maybe more. They're hitting us from 3 sides." Finn was in the back, firing from the kitchen window. The whole house was under siege, bullets thudding into the walls and shattering glass. Eliza took up position at the side window and started firing, not really aiming, just trying to keep the attackers from getting closer. In the muzzle flashes, she could see dark figures moving through the yard, coordinated and professional. This wasn't random harassment. This was an assault. "They're trying to burn us out," Finn yelled. "I see torches," Caleb swore viciously. "We can't hold them off and fight fires at the same time." As if in answer, flames bloomed near the equipment shed. Then another fire started at the corner of the house itself. They were going to burn them alive. Eliza made a split-second decision. "Cover me. I'm going for the pump." "You'll be exposed. We're dead if the house burns anyway." She didn't wait for permission. She ran for the back door, threw it open, and sprinted for the water pump in the yard. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet, and she heard Caleb and Finn laying down covering fire. She reached the pump and started working the handle, filling buckets with frantic speed. The flames were spreading on the house, already climbing the wooden siding. A figure appeared from the darkness, gun raised. Eliza grabbed a bucket and threw it, not at the fire, but at the attacker. Water and bucket hit him square in the chest, and in his moment of surprise, Finn's shot took him down. She kept pumping, kept throwing water, fighting the fire with desperate determination. More gunfire, more shouting. Then she heard horses approaching fast. More attackers or help? The riders burst into the yard, and Eliza's heart leaped. Margaret Hartley and at least a dozen ranchers, all armed, all firing at Rourke's men. The attackers scattered, not willing to face these odds. Within minutes, they'd melted back into the darkness, leaving only bodies and fire in their wake. Eliza collapsed by the pump, shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. Margaret dismounted and pulled her to her feet. "You all right? How did you know? We've been taking turns watching the road. Saw them heading this way and figured you'd need help." Margaret's face was grim in the firelight. "This is war now, no more pretense." They spent the rest of the night dealing with the aftermath. 3 of Rourke's men dead, 2 wounded and captured. The equipment shed destroyed, the house damaged but savable. And in the gray light of dawn, as they surveyed the destruction, Eliza knew they'd reached the breaking point. "We can't keep doing this," Caleb said quietly. "Next time they'll bring more men. Better weapons. They'll kill us all. Us." "Then we don't wait for next time," Eliza said. "We end this now." "How?" She looked at the captured men, bound and sullen, looked at the destruction around them, looked at the faces of the people who'd risked everything to help them. "We give Marshal Coleman what he needs to act. We make this so public, so undeniable, that Rourke can't hide anymore. The evidence isn't complete. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be enough." Eliza's voice was steel. "We take what we have, we present it in the most public way possible, and we force their hand, Rourke's or the authorities. Someone acts one way or another." Margaret nodded slowly. "You're talking about testifying, going on record." "I'm talking about a trial," Eliza said. "Not legal necessarily, moral. We put Rourke's corruption on display for everyone to see, make it impossible to ignore." It was risky beyond measure. If they failed, if Rourke weathered the exposure, he'd destroy them all. But if they succeeded, if they could break his grip on the territory, they might actually win. "I'm in," Margaret said. One by one, the other ranchers nodded. They were tired of being afraid, tired of watching evil prosper. They were ready to fight. And looking at their faces in the morning light, determined, angry, unbroken despite everything they'd endured, Eliza felt something fierce and hot bloom in her chest. This was going to be their stand. Win or lose, live or die, they were going to make Silas Rourke answer for his crimes, and they were going to do it together. The trial date was set for 5 days before the foreclosure deadline. Not a legal trial exactly, Rourke hadn't been formally charged yet, but a public hearing called by the territorial circuit judge after Marshal Coleman had forwarded enough evidence to warrant investigation. It was the best they could hope for under the circumstances, a chance to air everything in open court before a neutral authority, or as neutral as authority got in a territory where Silas Rourke had influence everywhere. Eliza spent those days preparing with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She organized documents into categories, rehearsed testimony with witnesses, anticipated every argument Rourke's lawyers might make. Margaret worked alongside her, and Thomas Wright prepared his newspaper coverage, ready to print everything that happened regardless of the consequences. "You need to sleep," Caleb said on the 3rd night. Finding her still awake at 2 a.m, papers spread across the kitchen table. "I need to be perfect. One mistake, one gap in the evidence, and his lawyers will tear us apart. You can't think straight when you're exhausted. I'll sleep when this is over." He sat down across from her, his face shadowed in the lamplight. "Eliza, we've done everything we can. The evidence is solid. The witnesses are ready. You've built a case that even Rourke's money can't completely bury. But can it convict him? Can it actually stop him? I don't know, but I know you can't carry this whole fight on your shoulders alone." She looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes, and felt something crack in her carefully maintained composure. What if it's not enough? What if we lose everything anyway? Then we lose together, and we start over. He reached across the table, taking her hand. "But I don't think we're going to lose. You're too stubborn for that." Despite everything, she smiled. "Is that a compliment?" It's an observation, and maybe a little bit of admiration. The warmth in his voice made her chest tight. Somewhere in the chaos of the past weeks, between the fighting and the fear and the desperate late-night planning sessions, what had started as partnership had deepened into something she wasn't quite ready to name. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "So am I." "You don't show it." "Neither do you, but that doesn't make it less real." He squeezed her hand. "Come to bed, just for a few hours. The work will still be here in the morning." She let him pull her to her feet, too tired to argue. They stood close in the dim kitchen, and for a moment the space between them felt charged with everything they'd been too busy or too frightened to acknowledge. "Caleb, I know, me too." He touched her face gently. "But let's survive this first. Then we can figure out what comes next." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and let him lead her to bed. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Eliza dressed in her best clothes, the same dress she'd worn to challenge Rourke at the council meeting, now carefully mended and pressed. She wanted to look respectable but not wealthy, someone the judge and jury of public opinion would see as one of them. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, more crowded outside trying to hear through the windows. Word had spread throughout the territory about what was happening, and it seemed like half the population had come to watch. Rourke sat at the defendant's table with 3 expensive lawyers from Denver, looking calm and confident. He caught Eliza's eye as she entered and smiled, a predator's smile, full of certainty that he'd already won. Marshall Coleman was there along with the circuit judge, an older man named Thornton with a reputation for being fair but cautious, the kind of judge who wouldn't stick his neck out unless the evidence was overwhelming. They'd have to be overwhelming. The judge called the hearing to order, and the courtroom fell silent. This is an evidentiary hearing to determine if charges should be brought against Silas Rourke for fraud, corruption, and racketeering. The territory will present its case, followed by the defense. Let's proceed. The territorial prosecutor was a young man named Davies, who looked nervous but determined. He started with the property records, showing the pattern of foreclosures and below-market sales. Then he called Margaret Hartley to the stand. Margaret testified about the pressure tactics, the sabotage, the systematic campaign to drive her off her land. She was calm and factual, letting the events speak for themselves. Rourke's lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Blackwood, cross-examined her aggressively. "Mrs. Hartley, isn't it true that your ranch has been losing money for years? That you blame Mr. Rourke for your own poor business decisions?" "My ranch was profitable until Rourke started interfering," Margaret shot back. "I have the books to prove it." "Books can be altered. So can memories, apparently, since yours seems to have forgotten all the times your client threatened me personally." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Thornton banged his gavel. "The witness will answer questions, not editorialize." But the point had been made. Margaret stepped down, and Davies called the next witness. One by one, ranchers took the stand. Each told their story: the harassment, the intimidation, the economic manipulation. Separately, they could be dismissed as business disputes. Together, they painted a damning picture. But Blackwood was good. He chipped away at each testimony, finding inconsistencies, suggesting alternative explanations, making it seem like a series of unfortunate coincidences rather than deliberate conspiracy. By the lunch recess, Eliza could feel the momentum shifting. The evidence was there, but it wasn't hitting hard enough. They needed something more. "We're losing them," Davies said quietly as they huddled in a side room. The judge looked skeptical. "Then we need to change tactics," Eliza said. "Call me to the stand after lunch. Let me walk them through the financial records." "You're not on the witness list. Then add me. Those records are complex. You need someone who can explain them in a way people understand." Davies hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but be ready for Blackwood. He'll come at you hard." "Let him." When court reconvened, Davies called Eliza Boone to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head high, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. After she was sworn in, Davies approached with a folder. "Mrs. Boone, you've been reviewing the financial records related to this case. Can you explain what you found?" Eliza opened the folder, organizing her thoughts. "I found a systematic pattern of financial manipulation designed to depress property values and force sales. Mr. Rourke would identify properties he wanted, then use his position at the bank to make it impossible for the owners to succeed. She walked them through it methodically. The loan terms that were designed to fail, the market manipulation that drove down cattle prices just before sales, the shell companies that purchased foreclosed properties at artificially low prices. She made it simple, clear, undeniable. These aren't isolated incidents, she concluded. This is a coordinated criminal enterprise designed to steal land from families who've worked it for generations. The courtroom was silent. Even Blackwood looked momentarily unsettled. Then he stood for cross-examination, and his smile was sharp as a knife. Mrs. Boone, you've painted quite a picture, but let's talk about your qualifications. You're not an accountant, are you? No. Not a lawyer? No. In fact, you're a woman who arrived in this territory broke and desperate just a few months ago. Isn't that correct? Eliza felt the trap closing, but kept her voice steady. That's correct? So desperate that you married a complete stranger in exchange for shelter. A business arrangement, I believe you called it. Yes. And now that same stranger's property is being foreclosed, you've suddenly become an expert in financial fraud? Blackwood's voice dripped with condescension. Isn't it more likely that you're simply trying to help your husband avoid his legitimate debts? The debts aren't legitimate. They're manufactured. Or perhaps you're trying to distract from your own questionable past. Blackwood pulled out a paper. I have records here showing that you were dismissed from your previous employment in Philadelphia under suspicious circumstances. Something about inappropriate behavior with the master of the house. The courtroom erupted. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She'd told Caleb about that, but hearing it weaponized in open court was different. I was falsely accused. So you say, but there's a pattern here, isn't there, Mrs. Boone? You attach yourself to men who can provide for you, and when that arrangement falls apart, you move on to the next one. How can we trust anything you say when your entire history is one of deception and manipulation? Eliza's hands clenched on the witness box rail. She could feel the judge's skepticism, the jury of public opinion turning against her. Blackwood was destroying her credibility, painting her as a gold digger and a liar. And the worst part was that some of it was true. She had married Caleb for survival. She had been desperate and willing to do whatever it took. The question was whether that made her testimony any less valid. She took a breath, forcing herself to meet Blackwood's gaze directly. You're right about some of it. I was desperate when I came here. I married a man I didn't know because the alternative was starving in the street. That's not deception. That's survival. And yes, I was falsely accused in Philadelphia by a jealous woman who saw me as a threat. I have no proof of my innocence except my word. She turned to face the judge in the crowded courtroom. But here's what else is true. I've spent the last 3 months learning this ranch, learning this business, learning the financial systems that govern this territory. And what I've learned is that Silas Rourke has built an empire on the suffering of good people. He's bought judges, sheriffs, and council members. He's used violence when the law didn't serve him. And he's counting on people being too scared or too beaten down to fight back. Her voice grew stronger. You can dismiss me because I'm a woman, because I'm poor, because I married for practical reasons instead of love. But you can't dismiss the evidence. The numbers don't lie. The pattern is there. And if you let him get away with this because you don't like me or don't trust me, then you're just as guilty as he is. The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone in the back of the courtroom started clapping. Others joined in, a wave of applause that swept through the room. Judge Thornton banged his gavel. Order! Order in this court! But Eliza could see his expression had changed. She'd gotten through to him, at least a little. Blackwood tried to recover. Your Honor, this emotional outburst doesn't change the facts. Mrs. Boone has no credentials, no credibility. I think she's made her point, Counselor. Thornton looked at Eliza. You may step down. As she returned to her seat, Caleb caught her hand and squeezed it. That was incredible, he whispered. I lost my temper. No, you told the truth. Sometimes that's the same thing. The hearing continued with more witnesses, more evidence, more legal maneuvering, but something had shifted. The audience was engaged now, angry, ready to believe that maybe, just maybe, the powerful could be held accountable. As the afternoon wore on, Davies presented the physical evidence,
The forged documents, the shell company records, the testimony from Wright's source inside the bank. It was damning, overwhelming when taken together. Finally, as the sun began to set, Davies called his last witness. The territory calls Silas Rourke to the stand. The courtroom buzzed. Rourke stood slowly, exchanging a look with Blackwood. He took the stand with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Davies approached carefully. Mr. Rourke, do you deny that you own controlling interest in the First Territorial Bank? I own shares, yes. It's public record. And do you deny that you've used your position to influence lending decisions? I advise the bank on sound business practices. That's what board members do. Did you advise them to call in Caleb Boone's loan early? If the loan was called, it was because of legitimate default concerns. Even though Mr. Boone's payment was received on time, and you personally ordered the bank to claim it was late? Blackwood shot to his feet. Objection! Assumes facts not in evidence. We have testimony from a bank employee stating exactly that, Davies shot back. Hearsay, which were prepared to corroborate with documents showing the payment was processed and then deliberately misrecorded. Judge Thornton leaned forward. Do you have these documents? We do, Your Honor. Then I'll allow the question. Mr. Rourke, did you order the bank to falsify records regarding Mr. Boone's loan payment? Rourke's composure finally cracked. That's absurd. You would never what? Commit fraud? Because we have evidence of at least 17 similar instances over the past 5 years. Properties foreclosed under false pretenses, then purchased by companies you control. Those were legitimate business transactions. Legitimate! Davies' voice rose. You've systematically stolen land from families, used violence and intimidation, corrupted public officials, and you call that legitimate? Your Honor, he's badgering the witness, Blackwood protested. Sustained. Mr. Davies, tone it down. But the damage was done. Rourke looked rattled, defensive. For the first time, his mask of respectability had slipped, and everyone in the courtroom had seen it. Davies pressed the advantage, walking Rourke through transaction after transaction, showing the pattern, forcing him to either admit guilt or tell increasingly implausible lies. By the time the cross-examination ended, even Rourke's most loyal supporters looked troubled. When court adjourned for the day, the mood had completely shifted. People were talking openly about corruption, about justice, about finally standing up to a bully. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed Eliza and Caleb. Wright was there too, taking notes furiously. Mrs. Boone, do you think the judge will bring charges? I think the evidence speaks for itself. What if he doesn't? What if Rourke walks away from this? Eliza looked directly at the reporter. Then we keep fighting. Through the courts, through the press, through every legal means available. One way or another, justice will be served. It was bold talk, braver than she felt, but it was what people needed to hear. That night, back at the ranch, Eliza finally let herself collapse. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day drained away, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Caleb found her on the porch, staring out at the darkness. He sat down beside her, not speaking, just being present. Do you think we won? Eliza asked finally. I think we hurt him, badly. Whether that's enough? He shrugged. We'll know tomorrow. He's going to come after us. Even if the judge brings charges, Rourke won't just accept defeat. I know. People could get hurt, could get killed. They already have been. At least now they're fighting back. Eliza leaned against him, taking comfort in his solidity. I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of fighting, tired of being afraid. I just want this to be over. Soon. One way or another, it'll be over soon. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars come out. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The frontier was beautiful and brutal in equal measure, just like the fight they'd chosen. Eliza? Yeah? Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know, he paused, searching for words. This marriage started as survival, but it's become more than that. You've become more than that. You're the strongest person I've ever known, and Don't, she interrupted gently. Don't say it yet. Wait until we know we're going to survive. Why? Because I can't lose you after you've said it. That would break me. He pulled her closer,
and she felt his lips brush her temple. Then we'll make sure we survive. Promise? Promise. It was a promise neither of them could guarantee, but it felt good to say it anyway. The next morning, they returned to the courthouse for the judge's ruling. The crowd was even bigger than the day before, everyone wanting to witness history. Judge Thornton took his seat, his expression grave. This court has reviewed the evidence and testimony presented in the matter of the Territory versus Silas Rourke. The allegations are serious. The evidence is substantial. He paused, and Eliza felt her heart stop. However, criminal charges require proof beyond reasonable doubt. While there are certainly irregularities in Mr. Rourke's business dealings, and while the pattern is concerning, I'm not convinced the evidence meets that high standard. Eliza's stomach dropped. They'd lost. After everything. That said, Thornton continued, there is more than enough evidence to warrant a full federal investigation. I'm ordering all records relating to Mr. Rourke's business dealings to be seized pending that investigation. Additionally, I'm granting an injunction against the foreclosure of Boone Ridge Ranch until these matters can be fully examined. The courtroom erupted. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. Not a complete victory, but not defeat either. A stay of execution and a chance to keep fighting. Blackwood was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, you can't simply invalidate a legal debt. I can when there's evidence the debt was manufactured through fraud. The injunction stands. Thornton banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. People were shouting, celebrating, angry, a chaos of emotion that reflected the mixed nature of the ruling. Eliza felt Caleb's arms around her, heard him saying something, but she couldn't focus on the words. They'd survived. For now, they'd survived. Marshal Coleman appeared at their side. Mrs. Boone, I need you to compile all your evidence for the federal investigation. We'll need testimony, documents, everything you've got. You'll really investigate? The judge ordered it. That gives me the authority to dig deeper than I could before. He lowered his voice. But you need to understand, this is going to take time. Months, maybe longer. And Rourke isn't going to just sit back and wait. I know. Watch your back. All of you. As they pushed through the crowd outside, Eliza saw Rourke standing by his carriage, surrounded by his lawyers. He was staring at her with naked hatred, all pretense of civility gone. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. Finally, Rourke smiled, a cold, terrible smile, and climbed into his carriage. But before he closed the door, he called out just loud enough for her to hear. This isn't over, Mrs. Boone. Not by a long shot. The carriage pulled away, and Eliza felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder. He's right, Caleb said quietly. It's not over. No, but we're still standing. That's something. Margaret pushed through the crowd, her face jubilant. You did it! You actually did it! We all did it, Eliza corrected. Every person who testified, who stood up, who refused to be scared anymore. This was all of us. Well, all of us just bought ourselves some breathing room. Let's make it count. The celebration that night at Boone Ridge was subdued but genuine. The coalition of ranchers who'd fought alongside them gathered to toast their partial victory and plan their next moves. But as Eliza watched them laughing and planning, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was still ahead. Rourke had been wounded, humiliated, cornered. That made him more dangerous, not less. Late that night, after everyone had left, Eliza stood at the window watching the darkness. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You should be celebrating, he said. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe it won't. It will. Men like Rourke don't accept defeat gracefully. Then we'll face it when it comes, together. She turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the dim light. Caleb, about what you started to say last night. I love you, he said simply. I know it wasn't supposed to happen, wasn't part of the deal, but somewhere between fighting for this ranch and fighting for our lives, I fell in love with you. And I needed you to know that before whatever comes next. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. You promised to wait until we survived. We did survive. Today, at least. And I'm tired of waiting to say what's true. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. Not the desperate kiss of people facing death, but the kiss of people choosing life, choosing each other. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza rested her forehead against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Whatever happens next," she said, "we face it together." "Together," he agreed. And standing there in the darkness of their hard-won home, holding each other against the uncertainties of tomorrow, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt like she belonged, like she'd found not just shelter, but home. Not just survival, but a future worth fighting for. The battle with Rourke wasn't over. The federal investigation would take time, and the danger was far from past. But they'd proven something important today, that courage could stand against power, that truth could challenge corruption, that ordinary people could fight back and win, at least some of the time, at least when they stood together. And that would have to be enough to carry them through whatever came next. The quiet lasted 3 days. 3 days of relative peace where Eliza and Caleb worked the ranch, rebuilt what had been damaged, and dared to hope that maybe the worst was behind them. 3 days where the federal marshals began their investigation, interviewing witnesses and seizing records from Rourke's various enterprises. 3 days before everything went to hell. Eliza was in the barn with Finn, taking inventory of supplies, when she heard the horses approaching. Too many horses, moving too fast. She dropped the ledger and ran for the door, Finn right behind her. A dozen riders thundered into the yard, and Eliza's blood turned to ice when she saw Marcus Tate leading them. Rourke's enforcer, the man who'd threatened her outside the council meeting, sat tall in his saddle with a rifle across his lap and murder in his eyes. "Where's Boone?" Tate called out. "Not here," Eliza said, stepping into view. Caleb had ridden to Margaret's ranch that morning to coordinate legal strategy. He wouldn't be back for hours. Tate's smile was cruel. "Even better. Been wanting to talk to you, Mrs. Boone, about how you've been causing problems for Mr. Rourke." "I've been telling the truth. If that causes him problems, that's his issue. Your truth cost him money, reputation, and respect. Now he's decided to return the favor." The riders spread out, surrounding the house and barn. Eliza's mind raced through options. She had a rifle in the barn, another in the house, but she was outnumbered 6-1. Finn was armed but young and inexperienced. If shooting started, they'd be slaughtered. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Mr. Rourke sent me with a message. You've got 24 hours to sign over the deed to this property. You and your husband pack up and leave, or we come back and burn everything to the ground with you in it."
The judge issued an injunction. "The judge isn't here, and by the time anyone figures out what happened, you'll be dead and this place will be ashes."
Tate leaned forward in his saddle. 24 hours, Mrs. Boone. Think carefully about your answer." "My answer is no. That's a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make." Tate's expression darkened. "You think you're brave? You're just stupid. Rourke's tired of playing by rules that don't work. He's going to take what he wants, and there's nothing you can do to stop him. Then why give us 24 hours? Why not just kill us now?" "Because Mr. Rourke's a civilized man. He's giving you a chance to walk away. What you do with that chance is up to you." He wheeled his horse around, and the riders followed him back down the road, leaving dust and implied violence in their wake. Finn emerged from the barn, his face white. "They're going to kill us. Not if we're ready for them."
"Ready? Eliza, there's 12 of them and 2 of us. Being ready doesn't matter when you're that outnumbered. Then we even the odds." She was already moving toward the house, her mind clicking through possibilities. "Ride to Margaret's. Tell Caleb what happened. Then spread the word to everyone in our coalition. Tell them Rourke's making his final move and we need every gun we can get." "That'll take hours." "Then you better ride fast." Finn hesitated only a second, then ran for the stables. Within minutes, he was galloping down the road, and Eliza was alone. She went through the house systematically, gathering weapons and ammunition, rifles, pistols, the shotgun Caleb kept for close quarters. She loaded everything, checked firing mechanisms, laid them out for easy access. Then she moved furniture to create defensive positions, blocked windows that couldn't be defended, filled buckets with water in case of fire. By the time she finished, the sun was setting,
and her arms ached from the work. But the house was as ready as she could make it. Now she just had to hope Finn reached Caleb in time. Caleb arrived 2 hours after dark with Margaret and 8 other ranchers, all heavily armed and looking grim. He pulled Eliza into his arms the moment he saw her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When Finn told me what happened, his voice was rough with emotion. If anything had happened to you, I'm fine, but they're coming back, tomorrow, maybe sooner. Let them come. We'll be ready. Margaret surveyed the defensive preparations Eliza had made and nodded approval. Good work. With enough people, we can hold this place. Will we have enough people? Word's spreading. More are on the way. And they came. Throughout the night, ranchers arrived in ones and twos, some bringing their families, others coming alone. By dawn, they had nearly 30 people on the property, armed and determined. Not an army, but enough to make Rourke think twice. Or so they hoped. He's not going to back down, Caleb said as they watched the sun rise. Not now. We've humiliated him too publicly. I know, Eliza said. This is the end, one way or another. Either we break him here or he breaks us. I won't let him hurt you. You can't promise that. Then I'll die trying to keep you safe. She turned to face him, seeing the fierce determination in his eyes. Don't you dare die on me, Caleb Boone. We didn't come this far to lose now. He smiled despite the circumstances. Yes, ma'am. The attack came just after noon. Eliza saw the dust cloud first, a massive column rising from the road, too big for Tate's dozen riders. This was something else entirely. They're coming, she shouted, and everyone scrambled to their positions. The riders crested the hill, and Eliza's heart sank. At least 40 men, maybe more, all armed and riding in formation like a military unit. This wasn't a raiding party, it was an invasion. Rourke himself rode at the front, dressed like he was going to a business meeting, completely out of place among the rough men he'd hired. He stopped at the property line and surveyed the defensive positions with cold calculation. Caleb Boone up, he called out. I'm here to make one final offer. Sign over the deed and no one has to die today. Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Go to hell, Rourke. Such language. And in front of your wife, too. Rourke's smile was ice. Mrs. Boone, surely you can talk sense into your husband. This ranch isn't worth dying for. Eliza appeared beside Caleb. Neither is your pride, Mr. Rourke, but here we are. Indeed, here we are, he gestured to his men. I have 40 armed riders. You have maybe 30 people, half of them women and children. The math isn't in your favor. The law isn't in yours, Caleb shot back. You attack us, and you'll hang for murder. Will I? Who's going to testify? The sheriff works for me. The judge can be persuaded. And dead men tell no tales. Rourke pulled out his pocket watch, checking the time with deliberate casualness. You have 5 minutes to decide. After that, my men have orders to take this property by any means necessary. He turned his horse and rode back to his line, leaving the threat hanging in the air. What do we do? Margaret asked quietly. We stand, Eliza said. We've come too far to quit now. They'll kill us. Maybe, but if we surrender, Rourke wins, and every other rancher in this territory will be next. Eliza raised her voice so everyone could hear. I know you're all scared. I'm scared too. But this isn't just about saving one ranch anymore. This is about whether men like Rourke get to rule through fear and violence, or whether ordinary people have the right to stand up for what's theirs. She paused, looking at the faces around her, neighbors who'd become allies, strangers who'd become friends. I won't judge anyone who wants to leave. This isn't your fight. But if you stay, if you stand with us, we have a chance. Maybe not a good chance, but a chance. No one moved. No one left. James Cooper, the old rancher who'd been one of the first to join their coalition, chambered around in his rifle. Been a coward long enough. Time to grow a spine. Others nodded, checking weapons, settling into defensive positions. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were staying. The 5 minutes passed in tense silence. Then Rourke raised his hand and 40 rifles came up in unison. Last chance, he called. Go to hell, Caleb shouted back. Rourke's hand dropped, and the world exploded in gunfire. Bullets slammed into the house, shattering windows and splintering wood. Eliza dropped behind the barricade she'd built, returning fire along with everyone else. The noise was deafening, the air thick with gun smoke and the smell of burnt powder. Rourke's men charged in waves, trying to overwhelm their defenses through sheer numbers. But the defensive positions held, and the attackers paid dearly for every foot of ground they gained. Eliza fired until her rifle was empty, then grabbed another, barely thinking, just reacting. Beside her, Caleb worked with grim efficiency, each shot deliberate and aimed. On the other side, Margaret was doing the same, her face set in hard lines. The first wave broke against their defenses and fell back. Bodies littered the yard, some moving, some still. Eliza tried not to look too closely, tried not to think about the men she might have killed. "They're regrouping," Finn called from his position. "Reload everything," Caleb ordered. "They'll hit us harder next time." But before the second wave could form, new riders appeared on the road. 20, 30, 40 people on horseback, riding hard toward the ranch. Eliza's heart leaped. Reinforcements, more ranchers responding to the call, joining the fight. Except they weren't heading for the house. They were heading straight for Rourke's men. The newcomers slammed into Rourke's line like a hammer, and suddenly the battle became chaos. Rourke's hired guns found themselves fighting on two fronts, caught between the defenders in the house and the fresh attackers on their flank. "Who are they?" Margaret gasped. Then Eliza saw the leader of the new group, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a rifle, riding like she was born on horseback. Sarah Brennan, another rancher who'd testified at the hearing. "It's everyone!" Eliza shouted. "Everyone we've been helping, everyone who's been suffering under Rourke. They all came!" The tide turned fast. Rourke's men, hired guns with no real loyalty, broke when they realized they were outnumbered. Some threw down their weapons. Others fled. Within minutes, the coordinated assault became a rout. Rourke himself sat his horse in the middle of the chaos, his face pale with shock and fury. He watched his empire crumble, watched his power evaporate like morning mist. Then Marshal Coleman appeared with a contingent of federal marshals riding in from the opposite direction. "Silas Rourke!" Coleman's voice carried over the dying gunfire. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 20 other charges I'll think of on the ride to jail." Rourke looked around wildly, but there was nowhere to run. He was surrounded, his men scattered or captured, his last gambit turned to disaster. Tate made a desperate grab for his gun, but Caleb was faster. The shot took Tate in the shoulder, spinning him out of his saddle. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Coleman and his marshals moved in, shackling Rourke with efficient professionalism. The land baron who'd terrorized the territory for years was suddenly just a man in handcuffs, looking old and defeated. As they led him away, Rourke's eyes found Eliza one last time. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," she replied quietly. "You just haven't accepted it yet." The aftermath was a blur of activity. The wounded were tended to. Miraculously, no one on the defenders' side had been killed, though several were injured. Rourke's men who'd survived were rounded up for questioning. Statements were taken, evidence collected. By sunset, the federal marshals had what they needed to prosecute not just Rourke, but his entire network of corrupt officials and hired criminals. The case that Eliza had started building months ago was now ironclad, supported by witnesses to attempted mass murder. "You did it," Coleman said to Eliza as he prepared to leave. "Took down one of the most powerful men in the territory." "We did it, all of us together." "Maybe, but you started it. Took courage to stand up when everyone else was too scared." "I was scared too. I just didn't have any other choice." Coleman smiled. "That's what courage is, Mrs. Boone. Doing what needs doing even when you're terrified." After he left, the other ranchers began heading home, exhausted but jubilant. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd actually won. Margaret was one of the last to leave. She hugged Eliza tight. "You changed everything. You know that, right? This territory will never be the same." "Good. It needed changing. What will you do now?" Eliza looked at the damaged house, the scarred land, the man standing beside her who'd become so much more than a convenient marriage. "Rebuild. Make this place into what it should be. Live. That simple?" "That's simple." When everyone had finally gone and night had fallen, Eliza and Caleb stood together on the porch, looking out at their land, the land they'd fought for, bled for, nearly died for. "We should probably talk about what happens next," Caleb said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this marriage started as a business arrangement, but that's not what it is anymore." "No, it's not. So maybe—" He paused, gathering courage. "Maybe we should do it right. Have a real wedding, make real vows, not because we have to, but because we want to." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "Are you proposing to me, Caleb Boone?" "I guess I am. What do you say, Eliza Carter Boone? Will you marry me again? For love this time, not survival?" She laughed through the tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, and it was different from before. Not desperate or stolen, but joyful and full of promise. The kiss of two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the peace of knowing she was finally, truly home. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Though I should warn you, life with me is probably going to be complicated." "Complicated I can handle. It's boring I can't stand." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Then you're definitely in the right place." The trial of Silas Rourke took 3 weeks and resulted in convictions on multiple counts of fraud, corruption, attempted murder, and racketeering. He was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison, his empire dismantled and sold off to pay restitution to his victims. Dutton and several other corrupt officials were also convicted, their positions filled by people chosen through honest elections for the first time in memory. The sheriff who'd been on Rourke's payroll resigned in disgrace. The territory began to heal. 6 months after the battle at Boone Ridge, Eliza stood in the rebuilt barn wearing a white dress that Margaret had helped her sew. It was simple, but beautiful, and she felt like a different woman than the desperate, dusty creature who'd accepted a stranger's proposal in exchange for shelter. She was different, stronger, braver, sure of herself in ways she'd never been before. The barn was packed with people, every rancher who'd fought alongside them, every family they'd helped, every friend they'd made in their fight for justice. Thomas Wright was there with his newspaper, ready to document the event. Marshal Coleman had even come, standing in the back with a rare smile. And at the front, looking nervous and happy, and more handsome than Eliza had ever seen him, stood Caleb. Reverend Michaels, the same preacher who'd married them the first time, smiled at them both. "We're gathered here today to witness something rare and beautiful. 2 people choosing each other not once, but twice. First out of necessity, and now out of love." He turned to Caleb. "Do you, Caleb Boone, take this woman to be your wife? To love her, honor her, stand with her through whatever comes?" "I do," Caleb said, his voice strong and sure. "I did before. And I do again now. And I'll keep doing it every day for the rest of my life." "And do you, Eliza Boone, take this man to be your husband? To love him, honor him, stand with him through whatever comes?" Eliza looked at Caleb, at the man who'd offered her shelter when she had nothing, and then given her so much more. Partnership, respect, love. Who'd fought beside her, believed in her, loved her not despite her strength, but because of it. "I do," she said, her voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "I married him for survival. I'm marrying him now for love. And that makes all the difference." Caleb slipped a new ring onto her finger, not the plain band from their first wedding, but one he'd had specially made, with their initials engraved inside. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, "again and always." The Reverend pronounced them married for the second time, and when Caleb kissed her, the barn erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud and full of hope. Food appeared from everywhere, and someone had brought a fiddle, and soon there was dancing and laughter and the sound of a community that had been broken and was now whole again. Eliza danced with Caleb, then with Finn, then with James Cooper, and 6 other men who wanted to congratulate the woman who'd changed their world. Margaret caught her between dances, hugging her tight. "You did good, girl, real good." "We all did." "No, you started it. You had the courage to stand when the rest of us were still trying to hide. Don't forget that." As the sun set and lanterns were lit around the barn, Eliza found herself outside for a moment of quiet. She stood looking at the ranch, the house she'd helped defend, the land she'd fought for, the community she'd helped build. She thought about the woman who'd collapsed in the dust of Cutter's Pass all those months ago, broke and desperate and out of options. That woman would barely recognize who she'd become. Caleb found her there, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Hiding from your own wedding? Just thinking. About how strange life is. How a single desperate choice can change everything. Any regrets? She turned in his arms, looking up at him. Not one. Even when we almost died? Especially then, because that's when I learned what I'm capable of, what we're capable of together. He kissed her forehead. What do you want to do now that the fight's over and we've won? I want to build something, Eliza said. Not just rebuild the ranch, but create something new. Maybe help other women who end up like I was, desperate and alone with nowhere to turn. Give them options, opportunities, a way to stand on their own. That sounds like another fight. Everything worth doing is a fight, but this time we'll be fighting to build instead of fighting to survive. That makes it better. You're extraordinary, you know that? She smiled. I'm ordinary. I just refuse to stay broken. They stood together as the stars came out, listening to the music and laughter from the barn. Inside, their friends and family celebrated. Outside, the land they'd saved stretched into darkness, full of promise and possibility. Come on, Eliza said finally. We're missing our own party. Let them wait. I want one more minute with just you. One more minute. Then we go build our future. Deal. He kissed her as the moon rose over Boone Ridge, and Eliza felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. She'd come to this territory with nothing, no money, no prospects, no hope. She'd married a stranger out of desperation and found love. She'd faced down corruption and violence, and won. She'd discovered reserves of strength and courage she never knew she possessed. And now, standing on land that was truly hers, with a man who was truly her partner, she was finally, completely, undeniably home. Not the home of shelter and safety, though she had that now too. The home of belonging, of purpose, of love freely chosen and hard won. The kind of home worth everything she'd sacrificed to find it. Ready? Caleb asked, extending his hand. Eliza took it, their fingers intertwining naturally, perfectly. Ready. They walked back to the barn together, back to the celebration and the noise and the community they'd built through courage and conviction. The music swelled as they entered, and someone called for a toast. James Cooper raised his glass. To Caleb and Eliza Boone, who taught us all what it means to stand up and fight back. To Caleb and Eliza, everyone echoed. But Eliza raised her own glass and looked around at all the faces, the people who'd stood with them, fought beside them, refused to back down when the cost got high. To all of us, she said. To everyone who chose courage over fear. To the family we've built together. To family, they choroed and drank deep. The party lasted long into the night, full of joy and hope and the sweet taste of victory. And when Eliza and Caleb finally slipped away to the house they'd defended and rebuilt, when they closed the door on the celebration and stood alone in the quiet, she felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. This was her life now, not the life she'd planned, not the life she'd expected, but the life she'd fought for and won and would keep fighting to protect. And it was everything she'd never known she needed. I love you, Caleb whispered in the darkness. I love you too, Eliza whispered back. Today, tomorrow, always. Outside, the frontier night settled over Boone Ridge. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers held each other close, bound together by something stronger than convenience, deeper than survival. Bound by choice, by love, by the unbreakable bond forged in fire and blood, and the courage to stand when standing seemed impossible. They'd survived. They'd won. And now, finally, they could live. Together, on land they'd saved, in a territory they'd helped free, surrounded by a community they'd helped build. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. And as Eliza drifted toward sleep in Caleb's arms, safe and loved, and finally truly home, her last thought was simple and profound. She'd come to Boone Ridge to survive. She'd stayed to fight, and she'd won so much more than she'd ever dared to dream. She'd won her future, her freedom, her power, and most of all, she'd won herself. The woman who'd collapsed in the dust was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, unbreakable. Eliza Boone, rancher, fighter, force of nature, and finally, beautifully, completely herself.